What's the most stupid rule you've been expected to abide by? In my sophomore year of high school, our old principal got a promotion to the district office. He was replaced by someone who had literally just moved to the area and knew next to nothing of the well-established culture of our small town. After a few weeks, he noticed a problem around the campus. He saw many people wearing purple and gold in copious amounts and in ridiculous ways every Friday, and he was sure it had to be related to gang involvement. Rather than ask anyone about it, he called an emergency assembly in which he lectured us about the seriousness of the issue. He informed us that from that point on, if anyone were to wear either of these colors at school, they'd be put in detention for the remainder of the day, and their parent or guardian would have to come and pick them up. People laughed and rebelled, wearing more purple and gold on more days, and the detention room was overflowing almost every day. 2 months later, he found out that purple and gold were our school colors. People were dressing up like that on Fridays to show support and pride for whatever sports team had a game that day, as was the tradition of our town for the past 60 years. To show how stupid he felt, he called another emergency assembly to apologize, to which he wore a purple and gold clown suit and a dunce cap. In 5th grade, my friend and I were walking through the mostly empty school to get to our bus at the end of the day. A teacher was walking in the opposite direction towards us and yelled at us to walk in a line. So we made a line, just the two of us, and walked like that to our bus. I went to a semi-boarding high school, about 10% of the students boarded, and new dorms were constructed while I was there. We had a big meeting and the principal said, "No mixed dorm rooms, we don't want anyone doing the deed." That's a bit paraphrased. One of the students stood up and said, "What about the gay kids? They get to do it." So for about a month, the rule was no students of the opposite or same gender in your dorm room with the exception of your roommates. Honestly, given how conservative a lot of boarding schools are, I'm surprised that it actually affected the policy rather than them just brushing off the question. Now, I'm curious, are there hyper-liberal boarding schools? What does that even look like? I'm an EMS helicopter pilot. I fly with night vision goggles. Problem: the Federal Air Association rules for using night vision goggles state that the aircraft must also be equipped with a working radar altimeter. So if I'm flying over the Sierra Nevada mountains on a pitch-black night and the radar altimeter fails, legally I have to take the night vision goggles off. Elementary school in Canada. We were not allowed to form circles. During recess and such, as you get older, you kind of get into that whole, "Oh, look at me, I'm getting older and cooler and I just stand around and talk with people instead of messing around in the snow," kind of thing. And apparently us forming circles was a safety hazard because supervising teachers couldn't see anything going on in the middle of the circle. I mean, God forbid, what if we were making a circle inside that circle? I once took a part-time job from a temp agency at Toys R Us distribution warehouse, where my job was to cut open boxes, place them on a pallet and put the pallet in the bottom of the stacks, which are large shelves. We were all just extra people they needed for the extra Christmas workload. I met all kinds of interesting people, including an elderly husband and wife who were farmers trying to make ends meet. Well, anyways, the one person in charge of us was an absolute C-word. She was a permanent Toys R Us employee. We were treated like crap. Oftentimes, we didn't have any boxes to cut open and were made to stand still at our tables. Large but low tables with 4 people to stand around. When standing here, we had to do nothing. If we moved around, or heaven forbid if we sat down on the table, we were screamed at. I guess they thought if we were going to be paid for doing nothing that we should suffer for it, like standing in one spot for up to 4 hours straight, which would absolutely kill my back. I've run into a lot of jobs where the rules seem to be just made to punish employees, oftentimes because of what some bad employee did in the past, and now all future employees have to pay for it. I worked at a Toys R Us store for Christmas as extra help stacking the empty shelves overnight. We had a rule that if there was nothing to do, you'd go to the warehouse in the back and drive around like a maniac in those little electric toy cars. I don't think this was official policy, though. At a previous job, I was instructed not to keep any document or email for longer than 6 months, and that my computer would be audited to ensure compliance. This included program source code. I was a programmer. Giving up my nail clippers at airport security. I fly the planes. I assume that it's preventing the highly plausible scenario in which, mid-flight with autopilot enabled, Pilot Paul nips off to the bathroom to do a quick spot of nail clipping. Meanwhile, an awful hijacker who's had the audacity to not check the "I am a hijacker" box on the security sheet sees this pedicure about to take place. As Pilot Paul is about to enter the bathroom and is at his most vulnerable, the terrorist leaps from his seat and wrestles Pilot Paul to the ground, stealing the nail clippers from him. Pilot Paul struggles valiantly to try and reclaim the nail clippers, but, as is taught in all good self-defense schools, when your opponent is armed, it's best to simply run away. Pilot Paul is fatally clipped in the jugular and dies a heroic death on the airplane floor. The hijacker fights his way up to the cockpit and swiftly unlocks the door with the pointy bit used to get dirt from the right corner of the nail there. He overpowers the co-pilot easily with the unfoldable nail file and switches the seatbelt light on. The passengers and crew take their seats and belt up. The hijacker is now in total control. I'm a system admin for a company that had a proposal to do some work for a large bank. They told us we needed to comply with their security procedures for data storage and mentioned the name of the document in an email. When we asked for a copy of the document so we could make sure we were compliant, we were told that we couldn't see it as it was an internal bank document and not allowed to be transmitted outside their network. In short, was told to comply with a security document we weren't allowed to see. I worked at Pizza Hut for a while. We got an order for 5 pepperoni pizzas. So I laid out 5 discs of dough, stretched them all, and then sauced them all. You know, the most efficient way to do it. The manager came over and said I was doing it wrong, that I had to make each pizza start to finish, place it in the oven, and then make the next one. I told him he was an idiot and kept doing it the efficient way. The general manager came in later and totally had my back. Christ, that's a pathetic victory. I have a similar Papa John's story. I had a manager who'd flip his crap if you lined up open boxes on the cutting table in preparation to put the pizzas in them as they were coming out of the oven. Long story short, one day we were slammed and he was chilling in his office, which had a window that could see the pizza cutting table. He was doing nothing, as usual, so I lined up about 4 to 5 boxes and he came flying out of the office and berating me. We exchange words and both end up in the owner's office where we explain our story and I'm visibly upset. I don't take getting yelled at by authority too well. The owner looks him dead square in the eye and says, "If she quits, you're fired." The manager left me the heck alone and let me do my job after that. I worked in daycare. We had classroom ratios. Say, 1 teacher must be in the room for every 5 children there. My new boss wanted us to call her when we needed to go to the bathroom and wait for her to come over and cover us for the time it took us to go pee. Okay, so this doesn't sound so bad, except we'd call her and she'd tell us to hold it, or she'd say that she was busy with something and she'd be there in a second. Then a half hour later, when we were slinking down the hall to the bathroom, she'd yell at us for being in the hall. She also wrote me up for being too loud. In daycare, I was singing songs to infants during circle time and they were all sitting quietly and clapping. She was crazy. Didn't happen to me personally, but my sister is severely mentally and physically handicapped, wheelchair-bound and frequently has health issues or doctor's appointments, which inevitably lead to many missed classes. Despite this, we've gotten countless phone calls and messages on the machine informing us that my sister has earned an in-school suspension for her missed classes. Seems like a great way to get your school sued, or at least in the newspaper, and not for any good reason. My lord, what a merciless bunch of disillusioned teachers must have been in charge there. I wasn't allowed to watch PG-13 or higher movies, or the book, comic, game equivalents until I moved out of my parents' house at age 19. Additionally, I wasn't allowed to have my computer in my room. Not entirely unreasonable. The weird thing about that is that it kept being true after I got married and was just visiting them. If you think that's bad, I have a friend who, at 19, his parents would make him hook up a box to their TV if they want to watch anything over a G rating. This box would monitor the closed captioning, and if it saw a bad word, and we're talking mild language here, such as the common word for doing the deed, it would mute the TV show and show the closed captioning on the screen, but it would replace the bad word. I watched a movie over there once, and only once. Not me, but I went to high school with a guy who had very overprotective, stereotypical Asian parents. He then went to college a 5-hour drive away from his folks and lived at college. So when he was away, for all his parents knew, he could have been doing light snow and going to adult clubs 5 nights a week. But when he came home for holidays, he had to be in before it got dark out, even when he was over 21. When Batman Begins came out, his parents only let him go to see it with me and some friends because we lied to him for his own good, and I said my mom was driving us to the theater. We were all over 21 at this point. In short, friends' parents made him be home before it got dark every night, and only let him go to see a movie when he was 21 because they thought my mom was going with us. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. In schools, if someone tries to fight you and you don't want to, you can't even defend yourself. The rule is if you throw a punch or perform any kind of violent act, you've consented to the fight. Are you a 140-pound freshman about to be killed by a senior? Did you hit them once in self-defense but got sent to the hospital? Well, guess what, kiddo? You've got 5 days out of school suspension. And we also have in our rulebook the penalties for setting off a bomb. Is that necessary? I worked at a zoo and we weren't allowed to use the word evolution. In high school, I left campus after class and got some ice cream. I came back 20 minutes later to meet with my teacher for help on calculus. When I walked into campus, I was stopped by one of the ladies on yard duty who informed me that I'm not allowed to come back on campus after leaving. I explained to her that I was coming back for tutoring, but she didn't care. Long story short, she took me to the admin office and turned me in. They gave her weird looks and told her what I was doing was completely fine. I had to wear an aerial harness to climb a 6-foot ladder. When I was in primary school, about 7 or so, I remember that we weren't permitted to eat Mother Nature lunch bars because they promoted paganism. I ate them every day. Back in high school, our then Dean of Students, a woman who literally carried around a ruler to see if girls' skirts were too short, tried to bring about a rule where girls had to have sleeved dresses at school dances. That rule didn't last long, as in before the next school dance. One of the female teachers, a 35-year-old, told her that after spending the weekend going to different stores, there was not a single sleeved dress that either she or a 16-year-old would want to buy. Half the school would have been in detention if they hadn't taken out that rule. As a guy, I would have deeply considered purchasing and wearing a sleeveless dress to the dance, before chickening out and not going at all. The company I used to work at told us that our emails didn't work externally, and that we could only email each other. It was total rubbish and everyone knew it. We could email our friends and families at any time, but we had to pretend like nobody actually knew. That's 200 people in the office hiding a secret because the IT guys weren't actually IT guys and had no idea how to set up an internal messaging system. Oh, those IT guys knew. They also thought it was a dumb rule and just let email through rather than block it and have to listen to people complain. At a private school I went to, it was mandatory for all boys to wear ties on Wednesdays. If you didn't wear one, you were sent home to get one. Well, one day I forgot. Luckily, I was blessed with the ingenuity of MacGyver that day and made a tie out of a long piece of paper towel. It worked for a couple of hours until some absolute jerks in my class pointed it out. Apparently, paper is not an acceptable material for ties. I was sent home. I once worked at a Chinese restaurant where if you forgot to put the rice on the table's order, white or brown rice, which were free, the owner expected you to buy the entire table's meal out of your paycheck. It happened to me once in the 6 months I was there, and they told me to pay the $50 tab for the table. I told them that if they enforced that rule, I'd walk out in the middle of service. They didn't enforce the rule. In my elementary school, a few times a week, they'd take the brightest students and put them in a class 1 or 2 grade levels higher to help teach maturity. I was finished with my work. Grade 4, I was put into a grade 6 class, and I didn't have anything to do, so I started doing the other class work. After I finished, I went to the teacher and asked if I'd done it correctly and proceeded to be chastised for the next 30 minutes. Apparently, there's some taboo on challenging yourself. When I was in high school, there was a rule that students were not allowed to grow facial hair of any form. If a student tried to grow facial hair or just plain didn't have time to shave before getting to class, which started at 7 a.m., he was sent to the disciplinary office, scolded by the vice principal, and forced to shave with a single-bladed disposable razor and no shaving cream. Multiple of my friends faced this punishment. I asked several teachers why this rule was in effect, and most of them simply stated that they didn't know. I got one answer out of the dozen teachers I asked, and that was, "It's so that the students don't look like they're older and get mistaken for faculty. This would allow them to roam the halls and not get sent back to class." To which I could only respond with, "Why don't you just learn what your co-workers look like?" The football coach was not happy with me after that. Now, to be fair to the coach, I've also had jobs where I've hated everyone I've worked with, and didn't want to do anything more with any of them than was absolutely necessary. But in defense of the author, who's mistaking a teen for faculty? I was homeschooled through high school, and when I was applying to schools, I had this conversation with the local college's admission folks. They said, "Okay, and we'll need a copy of your high school transcript." I don't have one, I was homeschooled. "Okay, well, we'll still need a transcript." "Right, but I don't actually have one." "Well, we need a transcript to let you in, so you'll have to send us one. You do realize that no such thing actually exists, so I'm going to have to make something up." "That's fine." Not mine, but at my friend's work. Not allowed to download Firefox because it's not secure. The main browser was Internet Explorer 6. To show school support when the school song was played, students would link arms and sway side to side. We got a new principal who immediately banned swaying due to its, quote, suggestive nature. Any student caught swaying will be suspended. And we were. This was 1972. He was fired in 1973. In 2002, my oldest child had this weird substitute teacher in one of her high school classes. She commented about strange rules and his bad attitude. When she said his name, all I could do was laugh. It was my old principal. We weren't allowed to talk at lunch in the cafeteria, grades 6 through 8. Years 7 through 11 in the academy I go to, we have to wear these thick black blazers year-round, and you're not allowed to take them off for any reason except science experiments and art. In 2009, there was a mini heat wave and we still weren't allowed to take off our blazers. Many detentions were given that week for taking off the blazers so we wouldn't get too hot. Oh boy, I sympathize. My last job required me to wear slacks, a thick cotton dress shirt, company provided, and a tie. You had to wear this every shift, even if it was 100 degrees outside and you were unloading the truck. Even sweating your butt off in the heat wasn't nearly as bad as getting drenched unloading trucks in the rain. Uniforms are supposed to make everyone look neat and tidy. No one looks neat and tidy dripping wet from sweat or drenched in rain. People who swear by dress codes should be forced to sit in a sauna wearing all that heavy clothing. A friend of mine said he had to deal with crap like this until one day when a coworker keeled over from heat exhaustion and turned around and sued the place for endangering his life. After that, if the news said it was going to be really hot out, they could dress down for the day. Sad that it took that for them to change, though. No Linux in high school because it was classified as a hacking tool. I went to a Catholic school from 1st grade to 8th grade, so you can just imagine how many absolutely ridiculous rules we had to follow. But I think the worst was when we got a male principal and he made a rule that we were no longer allowed to wear shorts under our skirts. At the time, I was only upset about it because it made no sense to me, since no one could even see the shorts. But once I got older, I realized just how sick it was. You know, I think I'd have told my kids to wear the shorts, and to call me and tell me every time someone reported one of them for wearing the shorts. I was on vacation with my girlfriend at the time, and her dad had a no peeing standing up rule. Literally, I wasn't allowed to pee standing up in his house. He said this to me at the beginning of the vacation, and I thought he meant to make sure that the toilet seat was down after I used it, since he only had daughters and wanted to protect them or something. So one time when I was peeing standing up as any man would, my girlfriend's mum says from outside the door that she can hear someone peeing while standing up. Still taking this as a joke, I admitted that it was me. I then got a 30-minute lecture on how I should obey his rules and not do that. Still one of my biggest what the frick moments in a relationship. I was never given the true reason for this rule. He said something about protecting his daughters, maybe not wanting to hear a man peeing or something. I wasn't really paying attention during his lecture, so most of it went over my head. I listened to him lecture me because he was a military man, my girlfriend's parents, and already hated everything I did, and I didn't want to cause any more problems. Don't smoke green herb, the federal government. It's okay, you can smoke here, California. At my high school, when someone was late, they'd just have the teacher mark tardy on their computer. Most students were never more than a minute late. They just couldn't get to class fast enough and would walk in 30 seconds late or so. Our principal had the brilliant idea of instead having a tardy table all the way across the school where students would go, line up, and register as being tardy. If you were late at the class, the teacher would send you to the tardy table instead of just marking you late themselves. Instead of having a teacher mark the 1 or 2 people who showed up tardy to their class, you had late students from all classes lining up to register as tardy with only one person to process them at said table. The result was students ending up 15 to 30 minutes late to class because they were waiting in line to register. Parents weren't pleased, but the principal insisted that it would reduce the number of students who were late overall. I'm not sure if they kept it or not. The tardy table was started just a few months before I quit school. Public schools always have the dumbest rules though. If you make the shape of a pistol with your index finger and thumb, it's 0 tolerance. You bully the gay kid and it's meh, whatever. My high school's cafeteria was way too small to legally hold all of the students for fire code reasons. For this reason, I'd eat lunch in the band room. My senior year, they cracked down on this. The principal called an assembly and announced that all students would be required to spend the lunch period in the cafeteria. At this point, I stood up and said, "Do you realize that that would require exceeding the legal capacity of the cafeteria, breaking the law, and putting student safety at risk?" The principal responded with, "Well, sometimes you have to make do with what you have." What's the most bizarre medical issue you've seen someone trying to hide or mask? Do you have any medical conditions? No. What medications are you on? Proceeds to name at least 10 medications. Oh, that's so true. Do you have any medical conditions, sir? Nope. Are you on any medications? Metropolol. So, you have high blood pressure. No, the metropolol keeps it down. Actual conversation I had with the guy a week ago. Any past medical history? Oh, high blood pressure, but that's it. No other history. Nope, that's it. Proceeds to take his shirt off. Sir, what is that huge scar on your chest? Oh, that's from my triple bypass. That's medical history, sir. Anything else you want to add in now? Oh, does CHF and diabetes count? I have those as well. Elderly people are the worst at this. They'll tell you they have no significant medical history, then when you look at their notes, you find out they've had 3 strokes, 2 heart attacks, and a touch of bowel cancer. That's why I always go with, have you ever had to go to the hospital or something to that effect? No question is truly foolproof, but that one at least is general enough that you might get more info than you need, rather than less. My favorite. Do you smoke? Oh heavens no! Have you ever smoked? Yes, but I've quit. How long ago? This morning. Once took an initial history from a patient who reluctantly admitted he'd had 2 heart attacks in the last 5 years. I started to ask him a bunch of follow-up questions and he got extremely huffy and defensive. It's not a big deal. If I'd known you were going to act like this, I never would have told you. This happened to me 3 days ago. A guy came in a wheelchair. Do you have any medical issues? No. Why are you in a wheelchair then? Oh, I have a degenerative neuromuscular condition and type 2 diabetes. In a weird way, I can kind of understand this if he'd been in the wheelchair for a while. I'm missing most of my left lung, and there were times when I answered no without thinking, because to me it's just me and not a medical anomaly. Each time my mum was like, "What the frick, you're missing a lung." I can see some poor med student doing a chest x-ray on you and trying to figure out why he can't find your lung while trying to play it cool. So, you've never felt like something's missing? This is hilarious. I'm going to have to ask some of my medical practitioner friends about their most egregious examples. Quitting smoking that morning and not considering yourself a smoker is either a great show of resolution or complete delusion. Not a doctor, but when I was working as a med tech in the ER, we had a 75-year-old male patient come in with an extraordinarily low blood pressure, think 70/40, and a ton of facial and upper body bruising. He was brought in via emergency medical services after the nurses at his nursing home found him on the floor in his room, where notably there was some blood on the wall. The guy wouldn't talk to us regarding why he was there, but was very talkative in terms of pretty much anything else. Sports, the news, etc. We eventually were able to get him talking after 4 hours, and he confessed that he'd wanted to take his own life and had taken the remaining amount of his prescribed nitroglycerin. Used for chest pain, it lowers your blood pressure rather quickly. Nitro is also the active ingredient in dynamite, but the amount in the pills is minuscule compared to what's in dynamite. And he had tried to blow himself up by running into the wall repeatedly. He was a really nice guy that sent a card to us after everything. He was just extremely lonely. Things to do today. Stop by bank and get quarters for laundry. Call brother and wish him happy birthday. Research nursing homes to volunteer at. I admitted a guy for pneumonia, which was odd because he was young and strapping, no other medical issues, and X-ray didn't look quite right. The pieces just didn't add up, so I started questioning him more closely. Do you use any substances? The patient said, Substances? That's disgusting. I'm no fricking junkie. I've never touched substances in my life. I moved on to other questions and suddenly, Look, doc, I just want you to know that I might have used white snow once or twice, years and years ago. I just snorted it though. That wouldn't cause this, right? How long ago? Like 10 years, maybe longer. It shouldn't be affecting you after this long. Well, more like 5. Years? Like 5 months ago. This goes on forever until he admits that he just got off a massive binge the day before, where he spent the past 3 days in a hotel with some loose women, smoking crystal non-stop. He finishes with, But I don't want you to think I'm one of those dirty junkies. No, I think you're the idiot who lied and was getting treated for pneumonia instead of getting the proper treatment for crystal lung, which is what he had. Here's a tip, I genuinely don't care. I'm not your mother, your spouse, or your priest. Don't waste my time and endanger your health spewing bullcrap. Whatever horrible, twisted thing you think is too shameful to talk about, I promise you, I've seen worse. Not so much bizarre as clever. I tested a patient who should have been positive for opiates, as I prescribed them. We do that too. The urine looked completely normal, but the test came back bizarre. He had an insanely high specific gravity, which means there's a lot of stuff dissolved in his pee. Sample was positive for opiates, but had 0 confirmatory metabolites, what your body turns the medication into. Otherwise, the test was totally normal. It took me a couple of minutes to figure out how this was possible. The patient was selling their pills instead of taking them and didn't want to get caught. They crushed up the pill and put it into the urine. This made the test positive for opiates, but because it had never gone through the body, the testing machine had found no metabolites. I use the case to find the smart med student in the group now. As a former pain management patient, that idiot is why we can't have nice things. My aunt is a family doctor, so patients come to her with symptoms and she directs them towards a specialist based on her diagnosis. One day, an elderly husband and wife came into the office, and when asked why they'd come in, the wife responded, "His foot has been smelling for a while, and I finally convinced him to come and have it looked at." My aunt, not hard of smelling, concurred that his foot stunk. She asked him to remove his shoe and sock. When he removed his sock, the bone from his big toe fell out of his toe and onto the ground. Turned out he had a very bad case of gangrene that had eaten away the flesh of his toe. He knew something was wrong but was stubborn and didn't get it checked sooner. And my big toe hurts now after typing this. Had this happen to me too. A woman came in that was an IV substance user, and all her veins had collapsed, so she used her leg veins and got a massive infection in her leg. It was black when she came in. She had put up with the pain for 6 months. The leg was amputated, but she was kicked out after she was found up shooting up in the bathroom. Terribly sad. My mother, the medical professional of our family, had a 13-year-old girl who was 9 months pregnant, in the midst of labor, dilated to 10 centimeters, and crowning in the emergency triage, swearing until she was black and blue that she was a virgin and that nobody knew what they were talking about. Her mother stood on the sidelines causing a commotion, demanding a real doctor make an appearance. Let's just say when the twins made an appearance 10 minutes later, they were all singing a different tune. I don't understand why people keep denying the undeniable. If your doc tells you that you're about to give birth, insisting on never having done the deed and being a virgin is quite pointless. Not sure of this particular girl's situation, but it's very possible that she actually believed that to be true at the time. It's called pregnancy denial, and it's considered a mental illness, I guess. It's pretty rare though, so I'm inclined to think that adolescents just don't always have proper foresight and she was just trying to stay out of trouble, and so she stuck to her story. She could also live somewhere that doesn't provide proper education on the subject, as that's a risk factor in young teen pregnancy. Alternately, she could have also been under the influence of a substance or persuaded to get drunk and then was taken advantage of. So it's possible that she didn't know, just extremely unlikely. I met a teenage girl with a full-term pregnancy ready to give birth, but her boyfriend insisted that the baby was premature because they only did the deed 6 months ago. After the baby was born, he just said that the baby grew really fast. Sure. Might be better if he never finds out, to be honest. Also, this group of stories feels like it's going to be yet another jaw-dropping example of how nowhere near enough people trust advice from their medical practitioners. A 60-year-old female came in after falling asleep and rolling on a pincushion. She had 3 2-inch needles in her left shoulder on the X-ray. We later found out she'd been trying self-acupuncture. My cousin told me about a patient who complained about her teat falling off all the time. She said she'd tried to glue it back on or use skincare creams to have it stick to her chest. Turns out she had, not sure what stage anymore, probably pretty bad, invasive lobular carcinoma. From what I remember, the tumor got so big that the skin was stretched quite a bit. Somehow, that plus friction led to an open, not healing and oozing wound which extended to the outlet valve of her chest. Well, nobody there understood how she didn't go to a doctor or a hospital earlier. Keep in mind this happened in Germany. She had a job, health insurance, and everything. My cousin's teat fell off. She didn't have cancer, it was just a botched bosom job. A friend's teat fell off after a reduction of her chest. She was out shopping the day after the stitches were removed and it literally fell off in her bra. She jumped in her car and sped to the doctor's office. A cop pulled her over. He didn't buy her story at first, then she showed him. He gave her an escort to the hospital. Internal medicine ward outside of New York City. 55-year-old lady was mute in the ED. Noted poor historian, but severely constipated, severe abdominal pain, needed rectal disempation, and more than just an acute workup, so gets admitted reluctantly to surgery. Next morning on rounds, she's talking a mile a minute, full-on detail about her diet and symptoms and family. Afternoon, back to mute and back to abdominal pain and constipation. 2 more days, same pattern. The team is stumped. She is blown away that we can't figure out what's wrong with her, and we feel the same way. Labs, imaging, consult teams, all coming up empty. Strict ins and outs, strict dietary restrictions, everything we can think of. The janitor comes in by chance and he's teed off that he has to change the paper towels so many gosh darn times in this one room. Seems like the whole floor is stealing them from her. Sure enough, patient has been consuming about 2,500 paper towels every 24 hours. The psych team comes in for the obligatory consultation, and of course she's mute. How do we get her to talk? 1 paper towel at a time. I think some poor intern got a paper out of that case. Hope she's doing well somewhere. I'm surprised surgery didn't figure out where the paper towels were going before the janitor. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Nurse here. One time I had a patient come in with insane intestinal trauma. Had to have his colon stitched up. Said he was fishing and fell. His rectum just happened to fall perfectly on a fishing pole. Must have been a wild night to be fishing in the buff. 1,000,000 to 1 shot, doc. 1,000,000 to 1. Yes. Yep. Undressed and fell on it injuries are an under-recognized problem. There should be a public health campaign about them. Too many people have gotten out of the shower, slipped and fell onto a box of cucumbers they kept in their bathroom. Not a nurse, but my mum works with nurses who have crazy stories. Here's 2 of them, both from ER nurses. A man came into the ER with a birthday candle in his wang. He'd stuck it in there to surprise his girlfriend on her birthday, but when he lit it, the melted candle wax stuck to him. And this is probably the weirdest one I've ever heard. An old woman came into the ER with a high fever, abdominal pain, dizziness, and a few other symptoms. She's showing signs of toxic shock syndrome, like when you leave a tampon in too long, so the doctor decides to check the woman to make sure nothing got stuck up there. Sure enough, she looks up there and half craps her pants when she sees 2 beady little eyes staring back at her. The doctor begins to pull it out, to which the old woman responds, "Put it back." Turns out the old woman, well past menopause, had gone to a bad witch doctor to get her help to get pregnant. The doctor's recommendation? Put a now dead turtle up there for a few days and she'd regain the ability to get pregnant. I don't think anything can outdo the turtle story.
and I think I'm done reading these stories.
Agreed. The story writer did good here. That turtle one will hurt me forever. I almost spewed at the turtle story. What in the name of Cthulhu? Agreed. Let's chalk another story onto the Made the Narrator Contemplate His Existence board.
From a nurse friend. A guy came in with burns to his entire Johnson. He tried to say he got it by trying to shoplift a hot barbecue chicken from a deli down his pants. What he was really doing was doing the deed with the chicken.
Not sure if this counts as hiding, but a patient we recently had tried to play off a rampant staph infection as just some leg swelling. Turns out that what he meant by that was that he'd had a horrible infection in and around his manly bits. Something known as Fournier's gangrene. Do yourself a favor and don't Google that. The swelling had gotten so bad that his eggplant had literally inverted. He later told us that he had to pee with a 5-gallon bucket held up to his crotch because he no longer had any idea where the pee was going to go. Since you're wondering, he went to emergency surgery within hours, which is likely to be the first of many surgeries. The only way to get rid of an infection like that is debridement in the OR plus a crap ton of antibiotics. Somehow this guy had no systemic signs of infection like fever or low blood pressure, etc., so thankfully he should pull through. Last I heard, he was likely to lose one of his testes, but I don't believe they were going to have to remove his whole Johnson. I know it's fun to talk about how gross this stuff is, but it's a very serious type of infection. This guy's life was definitely in danger, and thank goodness he didn't wait longer.
I mean, I think I would have gone to the hospital long before I found out my eggplant could invert.
I think mine just did invert reading this story.
I've been sitting here for 5 minutes trying to find the ways to properly convey my horror. Oh my god, I don't even have a way. I'm just sitting here thinking, okay, they don't mean inverted, right? It's probably not what I'm imagining. Except, I'm pretty sure it is what I'm imagining. I'm not sure I want you to confirm.
You know what it looks like when a turtle retracts its head all the way into its neck skin? It was like that, but with pus. It's an image that will haunt me till my dying day. This only happened a couple of days ago, and I feel the need to share this heavy, disgusting burden. I'm a pharmacist, and a patient came up and asked me if there was gluten in white snow, because she has a gluten sensitivity. I suppose maybe someone, somewhere tried to cut white snow with flour. Still ridiculous, but I imagine she was quite serious. I actually have celiacs, and when I was in Amsterdam, I couldn't find gluten-free edibles. When I interned in the OB-GYN department, we had a lady sent to the ER due to bleeding in her hoo-ha. When she was examined, she had a massive tumor there, the size of a football, growing between her legs. Her husband was with her. Both said that it had just appeared, and they had never noticed it before. There was absolutely no doubt that the thing had been growing for months. Sometimes, when in shock, people can be in denial of the most absurd things. I work in the lab, and the pathology department gets the foreign body items removed from a patient's body after surgery. Recent one was a chorizo sausage. Glad I wasn't there that day. A patient came in with chest pain, said they'd fallen and hit their chest on a table. X-ray was performed to evaluate for a rib fracture or a collapsed lung. The X-ray instead showed a long metallic foreign body in the left part of the chest within the heart. When questioned further, the patient admitted to lying and that they'd actually shot themselves in the chest with a nail gun. The wound wasn't bleeding, nor really noticeable. They were taken to the operating room and did quite well after open-heart surgery. Not a doctor, but an EMT. I had a guy who tried to tell us he fell while playing softball and hurt his ribs and arm. This was 10 o'clock at night. Came to find out he tried to screw his substance dealer out of some money, and the guy chased him down with a bat and beat him with it. So I guess he was kind of playing softball. Now that is breathtaking. Disguising your vicious beating as a trip and fell scenario is a bold move. Repeatedly falling onto the same bat all over your body is an incredible feat of clumsiness. Nurse here, and I'm late to the game. I've seen some serious crap, but in this story, the patient tried to hide something, and I paid for it as well. Was working at a teaching hospital here in New Orleans as an agency nurse. Some of my fellow agency nurses can confirm when the staff nurses find out an agency nurse is coming in, we get the patients that the other nurses don't want to deal with. In essence, the crappiest patients on the floor, literally and figuratively. I got my reports and was walking rounds with the nurses going off shift. We walked by a patient's room and he wasn't there. Outgoing nurse says he's always going down to smoke, and that he's very demanding. He was a homeless patient there for an infected arm from IV substance abuse. I asked the nurse why he was being allowed to leave the floor regularly with an IV in his arm, and she just shrugged. About an hour later, my patient finally reappeared and shuffled into his room. I make a mental note to go into that room next for my assessment after I'm finished giving another patient their meds. I go to walk in and the door is cracked. I hear snoring, so I'm knocking, and as I open the door I say, "Hello, Mr. Addicted to Smack. I'm Sherry and I'll be your nurse today." He doesn't flinch. I know he's not dead because I could hear him breathing. I place my arm on his arm and gently shake him, and the guy comes out of it screaming like a wild bear, waving his arms, cursing, and flings a bag of white powder he's holding right at my face. I hit the code blue button because I'm legit terrified. The guy is freaking the frick out, and I look like Frosty the Blowman with a yet unidentified white powder in my hair, on my face, and shoulders of my scrubs. The code team runs in with a crash cart, sees me, sees freaking out patient, and grinds to a halt. Someone runs out and calls security, and a big fella of a respiratory therapist pins the guy down. Security runs in and handcuffs him to the bed. The nursing floor manager starts grilling him about the powder, and I hear him start insisting that it's baby powder, and I scared him while he was cleaning up, and he threw it on me. That's really the last coherent thought I had. I came to in the ER and got the story from the doc after all the security footage was reviewed. The guy was going downstairs, meeting his supplier and bringing the goods back upstairs, cutting his supply more with hospital-supplied baby powder that he'd been requesting for chafing, going back downstairs and having his customers meet him in the ER parking area. He had passed out after shooting up into his IV in the parking lot, and I came in and scared the crap out of him. He had thrown a baggie of smack and baby powder in my face. My husband had to come and get me, and I was given a note in case the agency tested me in the near future. I also had to give a statement to the police. It was simultaneously the best and worst day at work I'd ever had, and subsequently the last hospital shift I've ever worked. In conclusion, worked as a floor nurse, patient threw a bag of smack and baby powder in my face, I got messed up. Patient was arrested. A case of teenage pregnancy where Madam Mama was present. Patient was presented with amenorrhea and fatigue initially. Patient became visibly annoyed when the first test suggested is a pregnancy test. The patient and her mother insisted that she had never done the deed with anyone. Angrily, if I might add, even when the test results came back as positive.
No, you quack. I'm telling you she never done the deed.
Nurse here. I had a patient come in for a hip fracture. While helping her to the bathroom for the first time, the CNA noticed something hanging out of her hoo-ha. Turns out she walks around with a prolapsed uterus and thinks nothing of it. My late father was a surgeon and, when he was a resident, had a middle-aged male patient come in complaining of pain in the rectum. They examined him and found a toy lodged fairly deep. When they asked him how it happened, he looked extremely surprised that it was there and then explained, "I was lying in bed and it was on and vibrating on the bed near me, and it sort of moved on its own. I guess it found its way up my butt all by itself." Loved hearing emergency room stories from my dad, and it sucks that he's not around to tell them these days. There should be a sign up in the ER that says, "The sooner you fess up to cramming whatever it is up there, the sooner we can get it out. You won't shock us. No, really, try us." 911 operators. What's the strangest, serious emergency you've heard? I answered the phone and gave my usual, 911, do you need police, fire, or ambulance? And the person on the other end just started screaming, "Bees! Bees!" I assumed that the bees were neither mugging him nor on fire, so I put it through to ambulance because what the frick even?
And now there's coffee all over my desk and my supervisor is looking at me weirdly. Thank you.
911, what's your emergency?
There's a pig in the road. A big one.
Sir, where are you?
At the stoplight. It's the biggest gosh darn pig I've ever seen. Get someone in here now.
This is in a one-stoplight town and the bar is near the intersection. How big is the pig?
About the size of a Volkswagen.
How much have you had to drink?
I'm not frickin' drunk. It's a giant pig the size of a small car. What is wrong with you people?
The officers showed up to find a full-grown hippo that had escaped from the local wild animal park. It was a big, frickin' pig, I guess. FYI, this was at 2:30 AM when the bars closed. I get a lot of calls from elderly people hallucinating because of UTIs. One woman had been following CPR instructions, and when the crew arrived, she was doing very gentle chest compressions on her slightly confused but very much alive cat. Wait, UTIs can make you hallucinate? Mostly in older people, weakened immune systems and all that makes it worse. The emergency itself wasn't particularly strange, bleeding in the hoo-ha during pregnancy, but I did get to listen in on the following exchange. So she's bleeding now.
Yep.
Where's she bleeding from?
Her bottom part.
Which bottom part, sir? I need you to be specific.
Her rectum. Front part.
Her what? Sir, is she bleeding from the rectum or from the front?
Gosh darn it, she's bleeding from her hoo-ha hole.
I think it's impossible to read that last line without a heavy southern accent.
I once had a radiologist refer to my groin as my private area. Like, dude, you're a medical professional and I'm 30. I can handle you saying the correct medical term for my junk.
And ironically, to post that story on YouTube, I had to not use the correct term while writing the script. Oh, the strange ironies of online storytelling. We had a lady who would call all the time about people in her yard or on her house, usually doing nasty things, and it was always a false alarm. The lady had been calling since way before I got my job, and even now, after I've switched agencies, she's probably still calling. She's mental, but not a danger to herself or others yet, so no real need to commit her involuntarily. Well, one day we get a call from her about a man at her house causing the troubles to her. My supervisor, who had answered the call, finally got fed up and asked to speak to the man. To everyone's surprise, the woman handed the phone over to the man, and there was someone there. It was her brother, and he was trying to get her committed. We ended up, I believe, asking him to leave the property because he couldn't have her committed against her will at the time. It just goes to show you that crazy doesn't always mean wrong. A family member who was working at an emergency room said the following case came about a month ago. A guy got high on angel dust and suddenly thought to himself, I'm a bit hungry and I'd like to have some eggs. Proceeds to cut out one of his testes and fry it in a frying pan. His girlfriend walks in while he's doing that and goes, "What the hell?" At which point he's like, "Oh, whoops, sorry," and tries to put his fried nut back inside the purse. Then he was in the hospital. I don't know the result, but I can guess.
This made my balls shrivel up into my body, and I'm a female. Jesus.
I've got one for you. Not 911, but it'll tie together. So I worked for an alarm monitoring company. I got an inbound call in the middle of the night from somewhere in Philadelphia. The guy on the line sounds really out of it. Drunk, maybe? My first thought that it was someone calling in to cancel a false alarm. Messed up voice was them waking from sleep, not uncommon. Some alarms start going off in my head. The guy wasn't making a whole lot of sense, and it's really hard to get basic information out of him. Eventually, I pieced together that he's a gas station worker and he's been shot. For some reason, he dialed the alarm company instead of 911. We weren't even his alarm company. There was probably an old sticker in the shop somewhere, so I've got no info on this guy. Mind you, we don't have any magical reverse phone lookup system, and our systems are locked down, such that we can't access a web browser. Genius, I know. Pulled out my phone, also not allowed, and managed to look up a gas station with the inbound number in Philly. Called 911 and got police and medical out there. No idea how it ultimately shook out. Stayed on the line, keeping the guy conscious and talking until they got there, and then I disconnected. Oh my god. Thank God you were able to help. Did they switch alarm companies?
I mean, in all fairness, that company earned their business after that.
My sister is an emergency medical technician in a small rural town. Apparently there's been more than one call about horses collapsing and hurting their rider or handler with broken arms, legs, trapped under horses, etc. When she was new to it, someone just described it as a collapsed horse, and she thought they were supposed to treat the horse's condition. Emergency medical service responds to a call where a man reported having multiple potatoes stuck up his butt. Not red potatoes, we're talking about these big brown suckers. The kicker was,
I was washing my potatoes in the shower when I slipped and fell, and all of the potatoes went up there.
What? I wouldn't even try to say I fell on it. I know nobody would believe me, and I'd look like a bigger idiot. I'd just own it, and the dispatchers would probably make a little less fun of me behind my back.
See, in a way you're right, but at this point with all these stories I've read, I'd feel obligated to say I fell on whatever it is that's stuck up there. Like, it's just the thing you're supposed to do. I'm not some uncivilized savage. I live in a society with rules and stuff.
My mum was a dispatcher for 20+ years. The eeriest call she ever told me about was one that started off with no voice, only breathing. She kept asking yes or no questions, working out a system to guess what was going on. Eventually, he could talk a little bit and said the person who hurt him was still there. So the officers went in with guns drawn. He'd said the person was there but hadn't specified that they were dead. Turns out the guy couldn't talk because his throat was sliced, which he had done to himself, to make it look like his wife, whom he had just shot, had attacked him first. Did he survive to be put in jail? He did survive. She didn't follow the case too much, but enough to know they figured out how it actually happened. I imagine he got convicted. Your sentence, "she didn't follow the case too much," is a sign of a true veteran dispatcher. People are always shocked when they ask, "So what happened?" after they got arrested or went to hospital, and I say, "I don't really know. I've been dispatching for 17 years, and I rarely follow up on my calls. When the call is over, I'm done with it." I've been dispatching for 4 years, and I'm adopting a similar policy. Every time I followed up on a call, it's been bad news. CPR instructions to a 14-year-old girl who found her mum in the bathroom. She survived to the hospital but was brain dead. Oof. And I imagine that you only see so many frankly absurd stories in your job before they all start blurring together eventually, like in this job that the narrator does. I got dispatched for neck pain. I got there and found out the couple were doing the deed on a couch when the female heard a large pop in her head, followed by a splitting headache and nausea. We transport and after a CT scan find out that she somehow developed a tear in her arachnoid meningeal tissue. Serious stuff, but humorous and odd. Wow, he almost literally fricked her brains out. Not sure if that makes him a legend or a monster.
A similar thing happened to me. We were in some weird position and I wanted him to pull up on my head. I hear this loud crack and then debilitating pain. We both worked at the same hospital and it was quite embarrassing to have to explain that my boyfriend may have broken my neck while doing some weird stuff. Turns out it wasn't broken, but there was some trauma. I was told by his boss to keep it strictly vanilla for a little while. No rough stuff.
I once dispatched a helicopter for a woman who got gored by a reindeer. Apparently there is a reindeer farm for tourists nearby and she tried to kiss one. My pilot and flight crew laughed at the MOI and asked 3 times for them to repeat themselves. I responded to a man in his whitey-tighties standing on the yellow lines in the middle of the road. Arrived on the scene to find this to be true. The reason he was in the middle of the road was to practice his karate moves on cars. Dispatch was having a hard time keeping from laughing.
This reminds me of the guy I went to college with.
He had Asperger's, so his social awareness was not the best, and he would often practice karate moves just outside the elevator door. He was fully clothed, though. A bloke I knew did the same thing as well, but only when he was high. He would throw kicks and punches while in hallways, on the train platform, and came at you throwing punches to test you. The very first emergency call I took by myself during training. The trainer was hooked into my phone and could jump in whenever. I answered the phone while my trainer was trying to grab a cup of coffee from the machine. Long cords, and as soon as the phone connected there was what sounded like an explosion and people screaming all over the place. Scared the crap out of my trainer, who sprinted back to the desk thinking that I'd just picked up some huge disaster or accident. He took over the call and started asking questions. And it turns out that what we'd heard was just rushing water from a hot water heater that had ruptured and was spewing water all over these 2 girls' apartment, and they were freaking out not knowing what to do about it. Water tip: make sure you know where the water shutoff is and make sure it works. You don't want to find out it's broken when water starts shooting out of your water heater.
We heard a strange noise at my old house. A hot water pipe cracked and leaked for 5 days before I found the source of the noise. 30,000 gallons of water in the bill that month. Luckily, it was the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania, so my bill went from 30 to 200 for 1 month. But I'm sure that's the reason the town put notices to conserve water for the rest of the summer. Bonus story: had a similar call a few years later, picked up to a bunch of people being loud, sounding panicked, and talking about someone being locked in a car. I thought it was a child locked in a car, a very high priority phone call for my agency due to being in Florida and a few recent deaths. So I put the call in as urgent while trying to get anyone on the phone to actually talk to me. But then I hear a door open and someone in the background screams, "It's out! The chicken is free!" And the phone disconnected. Florida. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. The first call I took was from a blind elderly male. He called because he had found his son on the floor of the bathroom. The son wasn't responding, so I had the man tilt his head back and listen for breath. Nothing. He said he was warm and had talked with him less than 20 minutes prior, so I guided him through CPR.
Compressions only because of the circumstances. He lived in a rural part of our county and we were low on rigs, so we did this for about 12 minutes before help arrived on the scene. EMS goes inside and immediately asks for PD. This isn't unusual. Sometimes loved ones can't or don't want to believe that it's too late, so we go through the motions until a trained eye is there. PD gets there and asks for a detective. This is also not unusual for younger deaths. 2 hours later, and still there, it piques my curiosity. I called the first officer that arrived and found out that the poor man had been doing CPR on his now mostly headless son. He had been taking a nap and his son had taken his own life with a shotgun. It woke him up, but not quick enough for it to register as a gunshot. When I asked him to tilt his head back, he did so by using his chin, which was still there. I think it worked out for the best because he had support there when he learned the truth. And it didn't make my job any tougher, but it definitely made for an unusual start to my dispatch career. I'm the son of the caller. My dad called 911 late one night to report hitting a 6-foot-tall chicken while driving and running off into a ditch. He had just crashed his car and his voice was a bit shaky on the phone, so the operator asked him to repeat himself a couple of times and then promised to send someone to help. The first cop on the scene got out of his car with a breathalyzer in hand. By the time he got to the back of my dad's car, he was laughing hysterically over his radio, telling people it wasn't a DUI. My dad had actually hit a 6-foot-tall chicken. And that's the story about the night my dad and all the local cops learned about emu farming. Consider me educated that for some reason people apparently keep emus in the United States. I can't imagine what for, but lesson learned. According to Wikipedia, emus belong to a ratite group and have high economic value for their meat, eggs, oil, skin, and feathers. The birds are adaptable to varied climatic conditions. Best memorable call I had was when I was still training. It was a few days into starting to take 911 calls on my own, and my trainer just listened in, and I got a very calm lady asking for paramedics. I asked her for the address and why she was calling. My son cut off his Johnson. I parroted what I'd heard back while mentally I was going, "Excuse me, what?" The lady confirms that her son cut off his eggplant with a knife and there was blood everywhere. Now, the whole room is bustling getting the resources I need for this guy with a knife who is probably bleeding out. I ask her where her son is in the house and where the knife is. When the lady can't really answer my questions, that's when I knew something was up. She has no idea where he is and she never saw him cut anything off. So I ask how she knew her son did this and she replies, "I have visions and revelations. I can see the knife." Oh boy. It becomes a back and forth figuring out who her son is and if anyone's even hurt. The lady even gave a neighbor's address instead of her own. Eventually we find her son's phone number through associations. The guy is actually just 2 years younger than her and a roommate. So my supervisor hops on the phone and calls the guy and cuts to the chase. "Is this so-and-so? Did you cut off your Johnson?" Spoiler alert, his member was still attached to his body. This was almost 4 years ago and I still bring it up to curious new trainees when they ask what their strangest case was. Otherwise, the few other calls I remember. A substance addict couple birthing their baby in a bathtub. Child Protection Services got involved real quick on that one. Double homicide. I talked to the teenage girl that managed to run out of the house after an adult roommate shot and killed mum and the teen's boyfriend. The teen thankfully wasn't hurt and ran to a neighbor's house. She vividly remembered every detail and was very calm until officers were with her. She was a stellar RP and was very mature. I'm very proud of her keeping herself collected after seeing everything that went down. I hope her life has turned for the better since then. Someone taking their life on the phone. My first one, an older guy called in from the house phone and very calmly started telling me the address, name, and his date of birth. He proceeded to say to tell his family he couldn't take it anymore and asked us to turn off his front porch light when we arrived. He also gave us next of kin info. I tried talking to him, but he didn't even acknowledge me. He had made up his mind. I heard a metallic bang immediately after he gave me the last bit of his instructions. First, I'd thought it was a metal chair or a step stool falling onto the tile floor. I kept an open line until officers were with him, confirming a self-inflicted gunshot wound through the left temple. The guy had a ton of health problems and just couldn't take it anymore. I can vividly remember the raspy and scratchy sounds I heard during the open line, which I believe were gasps, death rattles, and body twitches. He shot himself outside so his family didn't have to deal with cleanup. And of course, we had no other callers reporting shots fired in the area. My dad works in an emergency room, and one time he had to treat someone who had been attacked by an owl. The owl was unconscious on the side of the road and she thought it was dead. Because she didn't want the children of the school bus to see the dead owl, she decided the best course of action would be to put the owl in the back of her car. Unfortunately, the owl wasn't dead. It woke up and attacked her. My redneck uncle had the same thing happen to him. He hit a deer with his truck and thought it was dead, then put it in the back of the truck. Free venison. The deer wakes up and freaks out. The truck was definitely not unscathed. That happened to my cousin with a squirrel. He thought it was dead until he picked it up. That had to be an embarrassing doctor visit. Okay, so my friend is a former 911 operator and she told me that she got this call from what sounded like an old man. He was telling her that it's been a while and she should come back over, like, "Hey, it's been so long. I miss you. Do you still remember the address? 123 Street, remember?" She assumed that he was just senile or something. Turns out he had someone in his house and he didn't want them to know he was calling 911. For clarification, she did dispatch someone just in case the old man was incapable of taking care of himself, because she thought he was senile and that's how they found out. I feel like as a 911 operator, if you hear cryptic messages like this, it'd be a dead giveaway that someone was attempting to relay the address to you. I hope if I'm ever in this situation, the 911 operator has half a brain and isn't like, "Huh? What?" My soon-to-be mother-in-law got a call that a guy and his roommate were doing substances, smack, and the caller's friend had OD'd. So this absolute mensa hooks up a couple of wires to the inside of a toaster, turns the toaster on, and attaches the wires to his unconscious friend's testes. Honestly, not sure if it actually electrocuted the unconscious guy, but the caller definitely seemed to think it would wake his friend up. My mother-in-law's response? "Sir, please don't do that again." Not me, but my cousin. She had this lady who would call often and make up stories, most likely due to loneliness. But they still had to send someone out every time, so one day when they got a call from her, they figured it would be another one of those calls. She said, 911, what's your emergency? Oh, there's a lion in my living room. There's a lion in your living room. What's it doing? She paused to ask us what it's doing. I don't know, just standing there. Can you send someone over? It turned out there was actually a lion cub in her living room that had escaped from the circus or something nearby. The worst part about that story is that you had to take the woman's calls more seriously in the future, and her just leaning over to ask what its intentions were are the cherry on the cake. We got a call from a woman having severe abdominal pains. Simple enough. We asked the normal questions. Are you feeling faint? Are you vomiting blood? Stuff like that. Then we asked if it was traumatic or not. Well, she eventually tells us that she had a tampon stuck inside of her for more than 20 days and she thinks that might be why she's hurting. Bonus story, I heard someone else's funny story. This guy and his wife were playing around with various vegetables and the guy gets a carrot lodged up his… you know where he got it lodged up. So they tried to remove it so that they wouldn't have to call 911. She used a pair of burger tongs and grabbed onto something and pulled, but she was actually pulling his intestines. Fun. If you get something stuck, just call 911. I've heard it all before. I don't care that you have a vegetable garden in your rectum, I just want to get you help. Thank you for telling me that second story. I'm gonna go throw up now. Nothing really jumps out to me as my strangest story. I can think of the worst, scariest, dumbest, and most infuriating though. Some of my good ones are people saying they've locked themselves inside their car, someone getting ripped off by a working girl, someone stealing the caller's things. By things, they mean a safe full of green herb. A mugger going around hitting people in the neck with a taser yelling, "Surprise, motherfricker!" in a deep voice and then taking their phones and wallets. So many 911 calls with people essentially calling and getting themselves arrested because they were in the wrong and not the person they'd called the police on. A guy going jogging along the beach and coming back to find his car gone, and while driving him home after taking a report, we drove by it. He'd forgotten where he parked. Trying to let a guy off who was obviously up to some shady stuff, telling him and his girlfriend to just go and rent a room and rethink their lives. They stole the cop's cell phone, he made a call for them because their phone was dead, and ended up having a crap ton of crystal in his car when they caught up to him later. And one guy who got into a fight with a bunch of ducks, started losing, tried jumping a fence, slipping and tearing his ball bag open on said fence. Thinking about it, I do have one. Her boyfriend was bleeding in the shower. I tried to get her to say where and how. She beats around the bush a bit and doesn't come right out. We got the paramedic to tell us afterwards. She's a nurse and they were fooling around. She'd tried to catheterize him while he was hard and ended up puncturing something and they couldn't get the bleeding to stop. Managers, what secret tests do you put interviewees through without their knowing? I was a manager for Staples for a little bit and did some hiring of computer techs and computer salesmen or office supply people, copy and print people, as well as general cashiers. There was this one woman with 6 felony convictions that I had to interview for legal purposes. She wore ill-fitting clothes and looked like she'd just come from a war-torn area. Rumpled clothes, dirty face, messed up hair. Her resume was terrible as well. I'd asked her about the felony convictions and she told me that she used to do a lot of substances and got caught, also a few DUIs. She pulled a 1-year Narcotics Anonymous and 6-month Alcoholics Anonymous coins and said she just needed someone to give her a chance. She loves working with people and wanted to get her life back on track. I took her around the store and several people asked me where things were, and I saw her watching me. I'd straighten things on the shelf, smile at people, talk to kids, etc., and she started doing the same things after a few minutes. I needed a cashier soon, so I hired her. The next day she came in to do some computer training and she passed with flying colors. I stuck her on the register with another manager and she did great. After 2 months, I promoted her to my customer service lead and our overall customer satisfaction score rose by over 10 points because of this. Reviews came flying in, saying things like, "The extremely friendly cashier, great cashier, hilarious, love this store, best cashier ever, left my wallet with over $1,000 in it at the store, and a short, butch cashier chased me down to give it to me. Great lady, great store," and many more. You can't judge a book by its cover, or where it's been, I guess. Last I heard, she was in management training. I left the company for greener pastures about 6 to 8 months after that, and now I don't get to hire anyone, except interns or work and study recipients. I spoke to her on Facebook again and she said that she was turned down for more than a dozen jobs before I gave her a chance. Walmart, Warehouse Market, Office Depot, Food Pyramid, and little stores like that turned her down without interviewing her. She called every place and they said that her criminal record made it difficult for them to hire her to work with money. She's about to get her 2-year AA pin next week.
That's a great story. I wish every manager out there could read it.
My dad once rented a piece of property to a man with a felony conviction. I believe he'd killed someone while drunk driving. My dad said that he'd done his time and everyone deserves a second chance. It turned out that Rusty was the best tenant we'd ever had. He'd regularly do repair and maintenance work on our other properties in exchange for reduced rent. He did a great job, never complained, and when he did owe us rent, it was always on time. If every tenant would have been like Rusty, my dad probably wouldn't have sold everything out of frustration. There you go. Do your due diligence before hiring or allowing people into your lives, of course, but a second chance can be a great gift to give the world. It was a famous urban legend that Henry Ford would try this test on people. Once he decided to hire someone, he'd take them out for a nice dinner. If they put salt on their dinner before tasting it, he wouldn't hire them, or at least he'd think twice about it.
My father also had an interesting trick. He worked in purchasing and he'd often meet with multiple vendors to get the best prices or rates or whatever. He'd take a cup and cut the bottom out of it, and then put that cup on top of a fake quote from vendor A, blocking the price. He'd then fill it with BBs and put a lid on it. Then, when vendor B came into his office, he would politely excuse himself and exit the office for one reason or another. If he came back and saw the vendor picking up BBs, he'd ask him to leave immediately. My boss has strange tests. She comes in late for interviews very often, but if she's actually on time and the interviewee is late, they don't get a job. I call this test the hypocrite. That's a real warning bell. Whenever management doesn't have a schedule that allows them to be on time for an interview, it tends to mean that you should be extremely cautious about taking a job there. Of course, one thing is if you arrive and the interview prior to yours carries on for longer than planned. Another thing is if you're on time and you have one interviewer falling sideways into a chair 10 minutes late and unprepared. Makes me do the desperation algebra to calculate how badly I'd need to take a job at that place.
Agreed. I drove to a military site for an interview for a position with a contractor company. Close to an hour later of standing in the security area, not even a lobby, and I called the owner and he said he was on his way. In the background, I heard a baby crying. I ended up taking the job as layoffs were coming at my current job, and it ended up being the most disorganized, dysfunctional, irrational, unprofessional place I've ever worked in. Raise negotiations involved the owner claiming they were a non-profit before caving. Even the amount of vacation time I had would fluctuate 50% based off the owner's memory or BAC. Luckily, they were too lazy to actually track how many days off we took. If they bring a pen or pencil, they're cut above most of my applications. I brought a pen applying for jobs with me. Got a call the next day.
Fricking pen thieves.
I interviewed with a company recently who told me about their process for interviewing sales engineers. They would go about the normal interview, but that evening they would also go all out for drinks and try to pump the recruits full of alcohol. It was meant to be fun, but also a test of whether the person can know their limits and politely decline or hold their own after a lot of drinks. Apparently, drinking is a big part of sales. Getting the other person drunk while seeming to not try to get the other person drunk while not getting drunk yourself is extremely useful for getting a better price or a larger order or contract. I think at my first job out of school, they might have done something similar. We were out for lunch, presumably as a friendly thing, but also as a way to see how a person handles themselves in a mixed casual professional social situation, common for this job. One of the senior guys starts telling a story about getting way too wasted and acting a fool. I think it was a test to see whether I would respond with my own ridiculous story of debauchery, or try to maintain professionalism. I didn't respond with any stories of my own, despite being a new college grad who only had those kind of stories. I used to do interviewing for a job that was basically hacking the internet. At some point in the interview, I'd ask them increasingly advanced questions until they came to something they didn't know. Then I'd explain it to them. If they thought the new thing was really cool, that was a big plus. It showed they were really interested in the job itself, not just the paycheck. When I was applying to work at a chemical plant, my future supervisor gave me a sheet with several short chemistry problems on it. The first two were normal derivation formulas, the rest were just asking for the names and properties of the compounds listed. I was sweating and getting more and more confused until he took the paper back from me, adding the answers. They were all jokes, things like a ring of 6 iron molecules, Ferris wheel. He just said, "This is a really dumb place to work, so you'll have to have a good sense of humor here." One of my favorite jobs ever. This thread is scaring the crap out of me. I'm desperately unemployed and I had 2 big interviews this week that I thought went well.
Did you do the secret handshake? And did you point out the tie with the equation on it and solve it? And did you notice the comics on the fridge? And did you make sure you used the salt at the right time? Less importantly, did you know anything about the subject matter?
Seriously, some of these interviewers are making me lose my faith in humanity with how wildly dumb their crap is. So, you want to be a network programmer, huh? Well, grab that cord over there and show me how many sailor's knots you know. I used to think I didn't do very well in interviews. After I saw how interviewing processes usually go, I learned that I'm well above the average candidate. If you think you did well, you probably did do well, and if you don't get the job, they might have found someone who really knows their stuff.
Half of these techniques don't prove anything. Most of these people are D-bags who think they're being clever.
It does seem that way, doesn't it? Who the frick cares if the applicant with 25 years of work experience and an impeccable track record puts extra salt on his fries? I'd always ask folks to use a particular subject line when sending in their resume for a particular job. Nothing crazy, just please send an email with programming position as the subject. It kind of floors me how few people could actually manage to do this. I noticed when they did.
I do the same on Craigslist. I put in a code word at the end of the ad to make sure people actually read the specifications and requirements. Usually, they don't.
I'm a supervisor and I've done interviews. I don't ask the typical BS questions, I keep it really relaxed, have a conversation, and just get to know the person while talking about the job. That way I know what they're really like and not putting on an act for the interview. At the other end of the table, I enjoy these interviews the most. Whether I get the job or not, I at least feel like I put my best foot forward and haven't resorted to cheap cliches. I also feel like the person across from me is more intelligent than the regular trained HR monkeys.
Toby isn't a monkey.
Engineering manager here. I draw a right triangle, label 2 sides 3 and 4, and then ask them for the remaining side. Many engineers fail this or try to trigonometry it out. I do a lot of interviewing for B2B sales positions. The interview guide I'd been given to use is a couple of timed math questions. At first I thought it was pretty cruel to put 2 potentially stressful situations together, but it turns out you can learn a lot about someone outside of their skill with numbers. A candidate's response when presented with the math test is a good predictor of how they'd handle the unexpected challenge in front of a client. If a candidate gets a question wrong, I'll ask them what their approach was. Good for determining if they can communicate concepts clearly. And then maybe I'll explain the correct method to see how they'll handle coaching. But I didn't even take Psych 101, so maybe I'm reading way too much into it. Wow, that's horrifying. I can do math just fine, but you put it in the context of a high-pressure situation and my brain just turns off. For example, exams are easy, but standing up in front of a class of people and answering even a basic question and I can't even do 8 times 4. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I work in retail and I'm training to be a hiring manager. I was talking to coworkers about this very question earlier this week, and she told me her old boss's strategy. When a hopeful would show up for an interview, the manager would just do a brief introduction, then feign some distraction, apologize, and tell the interviewee to just walk around the sales floor and familiarize themselves while the manager resolves the issue. While the newbie walks around, the manager would have their sales floor's associates casually approach the interviewee as if they were a customer and have a brief conversation. The idea was just that they would end up shooting the crap about the job and their motives for applying. The person tends to be so wound up in preparing to talk to the boss that they often loosen up when they think they're in the confidence of an equal. Sometimes it's a person who gets along well and would make a really great addition to the team. On the other hand, one guy almost immediately admitted to another worker that he only wanted the job to support his growing substance habit. People lie, especially to the interviewer and especially when they need a job. This strategy allowed the manager to avoid a lot of potential liabilities and a lot of wasted interviewing time. Plus, these people would be working directly with the people doing the informal interview with them, not with the boss. It's important for the new guy to get along with the current crew. I also like that the manager put enough trust in his associates to allow them to be a part of the process. Sometimes a second set of eyes makes a difference. I've typically interviewed people for technical positions, which is a piece of cake. First, ask them technical questions about the job, and then ask them specific details about knowledge they claim to have on their resume. Where I work, padding your resume will get you tossed out rather quickly, but not after being lightly chided for putting stuff on your resume that you don't actually know. People with some work experience tend to pad their resume a bit too much. I remember one guy who listed BGP as one protocol he had experience with. I pressed him to explain it to me, and he caved, then admitted that BGP was used in a project he was involved in, but he had nothing to do with it and didn't understand it. That type of crap does not fly with me. If you put it on your resume, you'd better freaking know it, or I'm going to find out and embarrass you. My dad owns a small IT business. He has a homework sheet of 10 or so basic technical questions he asks potential employees to fill out over email before they meet in person for the interview. The questions cover a variety of programs and problems, and it makes it rather easy for him to sort out those who actually know what they're talking about from those who add a lot of padding to their resume. It saved him a lot of time and has helped him find and build a great team of 3 employees who really know their crap and get the job done right. Out of curiosity, what's to stop me from Googling the answers to the questions? He knows this is something people can do, so he really reads into what they're saying. Is there a common theme of how the person looks at problems? And is there a pattern in their methods? If every question has a dramatically different approach to it, it's quite clear they didn't come up with the answers themselves. Like how teachers look at homework. He isn't looking for the answer, he's looking for their methods. Oh gosh, a company that actually reviews people's technical proficiencies rather than making them go through an arbitrary social test irrelevant to the job. Color me impressed. I used to work in a cafe. The work was simple. I asked the applicants to butter me 2 slices of bread and put a slice of cheese on it to make a sandwich. Those who failed to wash their hands first, failed. What was the pass rate? About 30%. I'm in the middle of interviewing senior software engineers right now. What sucks about XXX? Where XXX is the current language they're using. This was generally done in a fairly light-hearted manner after I asked them to briefly describe their background and they mentioned the main technology they're using. It's not a trick or anything, but it's the most important question I ask. What sucks about XXX? Not enough fisting videos. Am I hired? My dad would have a rubber chicken waiting in the interviewee's chair when they came into the room, and he'd watch them, deadpan, to see what they did with it. My apologies, I didn't realize the last applicant was still here. When I have a big stack of resumes, I randomly split them into 2 piles and just throw one of them in the trash. That way I never work with anyone who's unlucky. On a serious note, bring at least 1, preferably 2 copies of your resume. When I ask you why I should hire you, say something honest and tangible. Everyone is a fast learner. Everyone is also a team player apparently. These are the 2 most worthless comments you can make to me. I'm a retail manager. You could have a great application and resume and 100% on our computer application skills test, but if your email address is anything like love420forever@yahoo.com, your cell phone has a ringatone such as Usher, or you mention boyfriend or girlfriend problems in your interview, I won't be hiring you. At least get a non-substance or party-related resume or application email address. And if you get by and get hired, don't ask for cashier code 420. Seriously. What if my email address is my username and my ringtone is a meowing cat? Username is great. Ringtone, well, you'd probably sound too crafty and overqualified. Why would such a unique person stay in a position at $8.50 an hour and last there? It costs a lot to hire. I'd say the average hourly employee outside of the pharmacy has been there for 5 years and makes around $12.75 an hour. Some make more, been around since 1999, and of course the newer people. Every industry considers those overqualified. It makes sense, sadly. One of the most dangerous kinds of people in an engineering environment is those who won't admit that they don't know how to do something. For this reason, if a candidate couldn't admit at least once during the entire interview that they didn't know an answer, it would raise a huge red flag. With some candidates, I could ask them esoteric question after esoteric question that any reasonable person would see it's okay not to know, and they would hedge and dance around it, or try and guess the answer. My favorite was, what are the first 4 bytes of a file that identifies it as a Java class?
There's some funny stuff in this grouping, but a lot of it is just about as useful as checking the potential employee's horoscope.
This reminds me of a joke. 3 wannabe MI5 agents are being interviewed. 2 men and a woman. They're given firearms and told to go into a room and shoot whoever's in there. But they're not told that the weapons contain blanks. The first man goes in and sees his girlfriend sitting on a chair in the middle of the room. He immediately breaks down in tears and can't do it. The second man goes in and sees his wife on the chair. After 30 minutes, he pulls the trigger and emerges distraught. He's passed the test, but his wife hates him. The woman goes in and sees her husband on the chair. After 10 minutes, she comes out covered in blood. The interviewer says, "What the frick happened? That weapon was loaded with blanks."
"I know," she says angrily. "I had to beat him to death with the chair."
I like that the married interviewees are the ones who managed to pass the test.
She was told to shoot whoever was in there, not kill him. I'm sure she didn't get the job.
Well, she did go above and beyond what was asked, though. She's a go-getter. My boss does the walking test. He does walking interviews and will change his pace to see if people would keep up with him with the change of pace. It's a big thing in hotels. What? Who's going to separate from the person they're interviewing with?
Oh crap, I'm suddenly 15 meters in front of the interviewer. I knew I'd screw this up.
I'm an editor who sometimes has to hire other editors. The interview is usually just a formality for me. The resume and cover letter tell me almost everything I need to know. Mistakes on the resume? No way you're getting a call. Disorganized or confusing layout? No thanks, I need people whose main goal is to communicate clearly. Applicants move up in the pool if their style choices, such as using the Oxford comma, match my company's, because I figure it will be easier for them to conform to our style guidelines. I'll also look for writing samples on the web. I would assume that for a lot of these personality test type situations, the interviewer is choosing from a pool of people who've already been filtered through their CVs. The interview is a chance to test their critical thinking skills among a few other things. I'm an engineering manager. One of the first things I do for drafting types is have them do a model for something I sketch up. I leave something important off, such as a thread size, part thickness, or maybe hole location, just to see how long it takes them to ask for clarification. People try to be self-reliant to prove themselves, so it makes a lot of people squirm once they figure out they don't have all the information. A good candidate not only finds the missing information quickly, but communicates the issue and seeks out the answer. 4 out of 5 assume an answer, which kills me when I ask the question, "Do you think your print is ready for manufacturing?" Sometimes it really is true that a candidate who has all the answers is someone who never asks the right questions.
If you don't push your chair in at Cracker Barrel after the interview, 9 times out of 10 they won't hire you. Manners matter.
I ask a question of medium difficulty that any competent person would be sure to get right. I then ask them if they're sure about their answer, implying that it's wrong. Tells you a lot about how they react to feedback and how they communicate with a client or boss when they think they're wrong. IT manager here, I always try to make the person perform a task or write code that will directly relate to the actual job. For example, if you're a front-end HTML jockey, you get a screenshot and an hour to build the page in HTML with Notepad. The special part of the test is that there's no way you can finish it in an hour, so it's as much a question of prioritization as it is technical ability. One guy wasted the whole hour trying to make the rollovers work. No offer. The guys who got offers were the ones who got a basic page running, then went back and went after the frills. My old manager kept a stack of comic books, a lot of old school superheroes and some of the Star Wars graphic novels, on a mini fridge behind his desk. He'd always offer the interviewee a bottle of water from the fridge, but in order to get it, he'd have to slightly shift the comic books. If they mentioned the nerdiness or coolness of him having them or asked him about them, then they would be much more likely to get hired. Caleb was a pretty cool guy.
So, only people who like comics get hired? I'm pretty much a nerd, but I don't read comics.
No, it was more that you had to not be embarrassed by the fact that there was a grown man behind the desk who happened to not like comic books. I don't like them either, but happened to like video games, Lord of the Rings, etc., and could keep up. He just liked people to be able to approach those kinds of awkward conversation topics. What was the stupidest reason you got woken up for? When I was a teenager, my much younger brother woke me up from a nap saying,
"Mom said don't wake up."
Another job well done.
Did you ever get the, "Guys, be quiet, Mom said to let him sleep longer," right outside your door?
This is why wars happen.
You mean why 8-year-olds are tossed across ponds and skipped like rocks?
Obnoxiously loud buzz and shriek of a National Weather Service warning to my cell phone at 3 a.m. telling me that in about an hour, it was going to be raining in a county 60 miles away. I figured out how to turn off that crap permanently. False positives generated by humans are unacceptable. One time, I got a tornado warning in November. I live near LA.
Did you die?
My daughter always wakes up in the middle of the night, but it's not a quiet wake up. She's 6. She screams at the top of her lungs, "Dad!" "What?" "I can't sleep." "Me neither."
Anytime I fall asleep at my mom's place, my 8-year-old sister will shake me awake and ask what I'm doing.
You guys really know how to sell the whole having kids thing, don't you? My brother looked at his clock, saw a :30, and assumed there was a 7 in front of the colon on Christmas morning. It was 3:30 in the morning. Even on Christmas, that's 4 hours too early.
One Christmas, I tried to get my family up at 1 a.m. Technically, it was the morning.
I remember doing something like this when I was a kid. I saw 12:30 and freaked out thinking it was already noon, totally oblivious to the fact that there was one of those in the middle of the night as well. My parents were pretty teed off. When we were both pretty young, my sister woke up at 4 a.m. on Christmas Day once. I had to force her to go back to bed. From then on, we instituted a "it's not Christmas until 7 a.m. rule in our house. I feel like everyone with siblings has been the victim or perpetrator of this particular problem. Now we await the karma of our kids doing it to us with a sense of dread.
A bazillion years ago, when I was 16, I was hospitalized for infectious mono, and they would wake me up to ask if I needed a sleeping pill.
They would wake you up? You mean they did this regularly?
In my memory, they were doing it every time I fell asleep. Probably it was just at night. Maybe just one specific mean, kid-hating nurse. I don't know. It was a very traumatic experience.
When I was in the hospital before, they had to wake me every couple of hours for different medicines. Later, it was just to see how I was, like a certain quick test or ask me a question. It made it so I couldn't sleep. The wake-ups were very quick though, like 20 seconds. At the very end of some, she would ask if I wanted a sleeping pill as she knew I was tired of being woken up all the time and not sleeping well. I'm not doubting your story, I'm just wondering if I wasn't the type to instantly be alert when I wake up, if I'd be thinking they were waking me up to ask me if I wanted a sleeping pill. I was in hospital for a week last year. They were giving me Valium at night to help me sleep, but they would give me that at 10 and my IV bag would be changed at midnight. One nurse was the chattiest frickin' B-word in the ward. Comes in and all the lights are off, with me clearly asleep. "Oh, hello, how are you? Blah 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 blah." She was terrible. And then they would wake everyone up at 6 because that's when daily cleaning, changing sheets, wiping things down, mopping floors, would happen. Plus I'd get my daily blood work taken at the time and an anticoagulant shot in the hip. Didn't need it, it was regular practice to give them to everyone. God, they really just don't like letting people sleep in the hospital. My grandma calling to ask me if I wanted blueberry muffins at 1 a.m. Of course I do!
Were they delicious?
Frick, yes. What time are you going to wake up today? Well, I guess right now o'clock.
My husband does this regularly. That or, what time do you want me to get you up? Ugh, butthead. He's so lucky I love him.
Some butthole at university pulling the fire alarm in the dorm building during finals this week. Did they ever find out who did it? Not that I ever heard. My guess is someone got drunk and thought it would be funny. The thing is, at my university, when someone pulls one fire alarm, all the dormitories get evacuated.
Normally, someone drunk just put a pizza in the oven and passed out.
In my halls of residence, any 3 a.m. fire alarm was usually a cheese toastie in distress. I was in the party res, and this happened multiple times at my university too. Once I'd gotten pretty drunk that night and had just gone to sleep, 4 a.m., when 10 minutes later the alarm went off. Despite being the loudest, most annoying alarm I've ever heard, it took me at least a solid minute and a half in my drunken, half-asleep stupor state to figure out it was the fire alarm. I just wondered why my head was suddenly so loud. Staying in dorms wasn't even an option. There was something like a $500 fine if they found anyone who didn't evacuate. I kid you not with this story. So my linear algebra professor decided to test us to see if we were truly learning the material in class. So he said, "Your cell numbers are in the school system, so I'm going to call each and every one of you at a random time during the quarter. I'm going to ask linear algebra questions and you have to answer it, or else you lose 5 points." I thought it was weird, but we decided to go along with it. 3/4 of the way through the quarter, I completely forgot about it, and at like 3 in the morning, my phone goes off. I wake up and I answered it. "Hey, it's your math professor here. Here's your question. How many vectors does it take to form a basis in R4? And what are the conditions needed to form it?" I paused for a second and just said, "No, I'm not doing this," and hung up. The next day I talked to him after class and he said, "If you truly knew the material, you'd know it in your sleep." I lost 5 points, but I didn't care. That was the dumbest thing to do to wake a person up.
I don't know my own name when I wake up from a deep sleep, much less linear frickin' algebra.
You should have called him every half hour from 2 a.m. through a Saturday night to ask him to tell you about something from the class.
I would have gone to the head of the department over this. This is beyond inappropriate. I know that sounds harsh, but this was a power trip, and it was an abuse of his power.
My dad called me and woke me up the other day to ask me if I wanted to go for breakfast. My instinctive response was, "Frick you, I'll kill you." I called him back 10 minutes later when my alarm went off and we had IHOP. Being woken up to be told I'm going out. I would have gathered that by waking up and noticing that you weren't home. I would assume, oh, she went out.
This happens to me all the time. I get woken up by someone yelling, "Bye, Alexandra, I'm going to the dentist or mall or work." Like, thanks, if only I could have figured that out all by myself. Sorry, I'm bitter about this.
They do mean well. They don't want us to worry. But yeah, we'd rather sleep longer and worry a bit than not sleep and not worry. Is leaving a note an impossibility? A friend of mine showed up at my apartment at 9 a.m. because he was in the neighborhood and had to take a crap. Well, would you rather he left it on your doorstep with a note?
"Dear friend, fix your doorbell. This is what you are sleeping in past 9. A lazy piece of crap. If any of my buddies pulled this on me, I'd totally understand."
Coworker called me at 1:30 a.m. to call out for the following day. Coworker, not employee, and because of a sore throat.
"That crap happened to me too. Hey, I'm gonna be out tomorrow. Can you tell the boss? Can't you call her in the morning? No, I'm gonna be busy." It's literally just, "Hey, I won't be there." "Okay, have a good day."
Seriously, or send a text, that makes the most sense. I got a lot of places say that's a no-no, but I can't imagine calling that early in the morning is any better. Or if you work in hospitality, you send the text and they ask you to come in anyway, cold or no cold, COVID or whatever. I really don't miss it. My dad, I think he'd been smoking green herb, but anywho, he woke me at 3 a.m. in my senior year of high school to see if I wanted to drive him to Walmart so that he could buy tan mini blinds for the dining room. He handed me a piece of paper that he had supposedly written down the measurements of the windows on, but it was just the wrapper from a piece of candy. Measurements. List of candy. You think he had been toking? You have some pretty high standards of evidence. Well, my dad can be pretty eccentric, and around that time he'd had surgery, but I just don't think the pills they gave him were that good. In case they were that good, do you know what the pills were called? No reason. My mom woke me at 7 a.m. on Sunday when I was 15 to tell me that Princess Diana had died. I was annoyed, so I just said, "Good," and went back to sleep. I was 18, and my mom woke me up at 7 a.m. to tell me that too. I asked if Dodie was with her and apparently nodded in approval when this was confirmed and rolled over. "I've just heard that Princess Diana and her lover were killed this morning. Mum, I swear it wasn't me. I've been here all morning. I have an alibi. Back in 2007, my dad woke me to tell me Jessica Simpson was getting a divorce. I have no idea why. I've never expressed even the slightest interest in Jessica Simpson. I barely knew who she was. I have no idea how he knew who she was, and yet he felt the need to inform me about the demise of her marriage at 7 in the morning. It was surreal.
Your dad was just really happy that his fantasy was finally coming true. When my dad would wake me at 7 on the weekend to ask me when I planned on getting up.
That was probably just his way of saying get up. Oh my gosh, what is up with parents in this? My dad would tell me that I'm wasting the morning. What the frick? All my family does in the morning is watch TV and yell at each other. I'd rather be asleep. My friend calls me.
Hey Jerry, can I borrow Smash Bros. Melee? I'd be grateful, man.
Dude, it's 3:30 in the morning. Fricking wait until the sun is out. Jerry took my words seriously.
Hey, the sun is out. Can I get the game now?
Sure.
Sorry everyone, tournament is delayed until sunrise because someone is being a jerk.
Well, mate, you should have your own copy of the game if you're going to host a tournament, Steve.
Get stuffed, Jerry.
You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My girlfriend punched me in the face. According to her, she just woke up from a dream, but was still in one of those weird half-conscious, half-dreaming states where she didn't really know where she was or what was going on. She said she looked beside her in bed and saw some dark mass laying there that made her uncomfortable. So after watching it for a moment, she attacked it. Ended up decking me square in the nose. Hard. Somehow, I instantly knew what had happened. I shot up and yelled, "Babe, what the frick?" She mumbled some sort of half-asleep apology, immediately rolled over and went back to sleep. I, on the other hand, lay there unable to go back to sleep for 2 more hours, because it's not exactly easy to do when you're woken up like that. I was furious. It's one of my favorite stories about her and us now, though.
Well, at least now you know she can handle it if any strange dark mass of a person is in your home unwanted.
My dad's, "Wake up, we won $1 million! April Fool's prank 2 years in a row. He really thought he was clever." I can't remember if I was actually woken up or woke up on my own, but I woke up one morning to my ex mad at me because she had a dream that I cheated on her. My dad left for work with soup boiling on the stove. I woke up smelling smoke and I thought someone was smoking. The window was open. I went into the kitchen and freaked out. Being woken up to ask me if I wanted to smoke a bowl.
No, bro. The reason I fell asleep in the first place was because I'm too high.
I woke up punching myself in the face repeatedly. I must have tried to itch my nose or something and did it. Then I hit myself again trying to block whatever was hitting me. I must have hit myself in the face 10 times before I woke up enough to realize what was happening. My whole arm fell asleep and it was dark. Roundhouse kick to the face from my 2-year-old son. Did you repay the favor the following night? With twice the fury. Roundhouse kick 2. Twice the fury. A couple of nights ago, my husband flipped the light on in the middle of the night because he was looking for spiders hanging from the ceiling while he was dreaming. Twice. 2 hours apart. Thinking about it, it parallels with the time he was sleep-talking, stood up in the middle of the bed and then rolled me over to look under me for the map that he was dreaming was missing. I speak Spanish, but the rest of my family doesn't. One Saturday morning, my dad was having a garage sale and woke me up at 7 AM to translate for some guy who didn't speak English and wanted to negotiate prices. So I dragged myself out of bed. I'd had a really late night the night before and was a little hungover and went to talk to this guy about a punching bag. I was talking with him for about 5 minutes before I realized he was speaking Portuguese and that I was having a one-sided conversation with myself and neither of us could actually understand the other. In conclusion, Dad woke me up to translate for Spanish speaker at a garage sale. The guy was speaking Portuguese. My roommate and her boyfriend snuck in at 6 AM and tried to quietly do the deed while I was sleeping in the other bed 2 feet away. Wow, F that guy. If he's cool with that.
Just gonna note, no one said anyone had a problem with it, just that it was a stupid reason to wake up.
I woke myself up because I was laughing. I was dreaming about flatulent jokes. I got woken up by my own laughing once too. I remember I was camping and I was dreaming about exploding outhouses and for some reason it got me in my giggle bone. It still makes me chuckle a bit.
Family members have woken themselves up snoring loudly. My parents' dog tooted itself awake a few times.
And the narrator has also woken himself up with his own toots and snores on a large number of occasions, so let's go easy on the dog shaming. A tiny earthquake, and then when I was about to fall back asleep, my brother came into the room freaking out.
I woke up from a minor earthquake once. We don't really get earthquakes here, so I assumed it was a dream until I saw it on the news the next day.
My mum very excitedly woke up to show me a recently dead bird that she had seen fly into our window. I told her that she wasn't a cat, and behavior such as this was unacceptable. During college, some drunk idiot tried and failed to cook grilled cheese at 2:30 in the morning, set off the fire alarm for an 8th-floor dorm. The campus police officer who showed up to help clear the scene stood on top of his cruiser and yelled, "Who the frick burns grilled cheese at 2 a.m.?"
My mom wants me to be awake. She doesn't have anything to do, she just doesn't want me sleeping if the sun is out.
Most fun thing for teenagers happen around midnight. Wake her up then so she doesn't miss out on that. I got this crap when I was living at home during the summer between years of college and working afternoon and evening shifts in retail. I'd wake up at about 11:30 a.m., shower, eat, go to work, come home, have dinner, and then stay up until 2 because that's when all of my friends were online. My parents really did not like me sleeping so late. Their reasoning was that I needed to be up at the same time as the rest of the world. I guess it's somehow disrespectful to sleep late if no one else is, but what the heck would I be doing in the morning if I don't work until 1 p.m.? I finally just said it was unreasonable to expect me to be up at 7 a.m. when my schedule was the way it was, and that if my shift changed, I would change my schedule. But yeah, there was like a week every summer of, "Stop sleeping so late, other people are already up." Yes, it's exactly like that, except not always related to work schedule. Still, my mom doesn't want me to sleep the day away, and she doesn't like me being awake while everyone else sleeps. It's not as if I'm loud or doing anything dangerous. My manager once called me at 6 a.m. to ask if I saw his email he sent about an hour before about shirt sizes for the new uniforms. My boss does that. In the call, he's always slightly disparaging that I didn't email confirm I got his email. I'm always like, "You sent it, I got it. There wasn't a question. When there is something to respond to, I'll do it when I get to them." Now I just click reply on his emails and peg out "OK" on the keyboard and hit send. I woke my sister up for moral support when I went to battle with giant-ass spiders downstairs. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that spiders are an acceptable reason to wake someone up. My roommate, who I love so much, put an old potato in the microwave for 5 minutes. We don't know if it's because she didn't poke it with holes, or if it's because it was old, or if 5 minutes is too long for a raw potato, but we had a food flare-up. I wake up because the fire alarm is going off, and I peek my head out and there's a small fire in the microwave. I blasted it with water from a spray bottle until it stopped glowing, and we threw out the melted plate and blew the smoke out of the windows, and we laughed about it for like an hour. It was such a stupid situation. Who lights a fire in a microwave? Who messes up baking a potato? Who's baking potatoes after midnight anyway? Why was it so funny to hold a melted plate in the middle of the night? It's actually one of my favorite college memories so far. My significant other waking me up in a panic because there was a parrot giving birth on the floor. He was talking in his sleep, by the way. Someone waking me up to tell the person next to me the time.
My friends stopped by to ask me if I was asleep.
It's actually really annoying when someone shakes you and wakes you up and then looks you in the eye and asks if you're awake.
It's even more annoying when they ask, "Were you asleep?"
Yes, it's like someone seeing you struggle to carry a heavy load and asking you, "Is it heavy?" I was having a nap one day. I very rarely nap, and a friend of mine who lives halfway across town charges into my room and screams,
"Do you have a phone book?"
I was so dazed and confused that I didn't even consider asking why and just gave him the book. Years later, at his wedding, I gave him a phone book of my new town. I will never forget the nap that got away.
I have questions. 1. Why, if he lives halfway across town, did he charge into your room? 2. Why did he need a phone book? 3. People still use phone books?
I'm a pretty heavy sleeper, especially after a night of drinking. One Saturday morning when I was in college, I slept through a fire alarm. I woke up when a security officer entered my room and started yelling at me.
"Hey, why are you still here? Didn't you hear the alarm?"
I was still in my bed at that point, and I just looked at him and said, "I didn't hear it, I was sleeping." He then tells me that the fire alarm was set off in my room and started rattling off questions. "Were you smoking, microwaving, toasting, lighting incense?" I told him, "No, dude, I just told you I was sleeping, you literally woke me up." At this point I could tell he was getting a bit frustrated, but so was I. He then tells me, "Get up, you need to go outside with the others." I responded, "Well, can I at least get dressed? I'm not wearing boxers." After that, he finally left, and I put on some underwear and my robe and went outside. It turned out my smoke alarm was defective, which is why it set off the system and why I couldn't hear it as loudly as everyone else. It wasn't necessarily a stupid reason to wake me up, but at the time I was super annoyed because it sucked to wake up to a security guard yelling at you early in the morning. My girlfriend woke me up to tell me the toilet was clogged and asked if I could help. Walked to the bathroom, watched her use the plunger to unclog the toilet, and walked back into bed as she said thank you for the help. Long-serving EMT. Been woken up on a shift at Lord knows what hours for toe pain for 4 weeks, gangbanger with the flu, the patient who wanted to ask if she could take aspirin, picked the same guy up for the 4th time in 24 hours for no reason, people who had nightmares. The list is endless. All young, otherwise healthy people with nothing emergent or immediate happening to them. It's my job. I was on shift, so I shouldn't really care. But when you work 24, 36, and 48-hour shifts, those 10-minute naps are a blessing. 1 hour's a full night's sleep, and anything over that a miracle. I was once woken at 3 a.m. to repair a barn door in the freezing cold because horses are bastards. Human resources. What's the pettiest, what the hell, complaint that you've had to deal with? I was doing temp work at a heating, AC, and plumbing company, answering the phones and stuff, but there was this one girl that just hated me. I guess I was too happy to be employed? Anyway, I go in one day and the owner pulls me into the office. I have to get a substance test done because I'm too energetic and I blow my nose frequently. I'm a morning person and I have allergies. The results come back negative, the owner apologizes, and I quit on the spot. That's right, Toby Flendersons of the world, we're reading your stories today. I for one cannot wait to see the depths of petty crappiness displayed by bored, unsatisfied office workers.
He doesn't say good morning to me. My boyfriend's boss pulled that on him the other day. Why don't you say hello and ask me how I am? It was like, really?
My gosh, I've got a similar complaint in the military once. I was in Iraq, stationed on a base where we, the army, worked with the Marines. I was guarding one of our top-secret facilities and had been on duty an hour or two. Suddenly, this random Marine came up to me, irate. "You're so rude," he said to me. "I've passed by you at least 3 times and you haven't said hello to me once." At the time, I was flabbergasted by this complete stranger being mad at me for not doing something I in no way considered part of my job. I didn't know how to respond. I wish I'd had the wits to point out that I was a soldier on guard duty, not a frickin' hostess at Applebee's. I don't know if it was a cultural thing, maybe he was from the South, or a gender thing because I'm a female and therefore expected to be sweet or something, but I just couldn't understand why a fellow service member would expect someone on duty to be issuing friendly greetings at passers-by. I mean, I've done the hostess thing and I'm pretty good at being friendly when it's appropriate, but when my orders are use deadly force if necessary to protect this room and to not make our customers feel at home, I just don't expect people to complain about me not saying hello every time they walk past me. This was 12 years ago. I'm still mad. Now, some of you have written to me to point out that in Marine culture, the greeting of the day is actually a real thing. I honestly never realized that. I just told this story to my husband, who was also in the army and did 2 tours in Iraq. His first reaction to my story was, "What the frick was that guy's problem?" But after I mentioned the greeting of the day that y'all told me about, he said, "Oh, yeah, that makes sense." Like me, he never experienced that after basic training. He was in a very different kind of unit than I was too. So I think this was just an Army or Marines culture clash thing. I'm grateful to those who kindly informed me of this. Okay, this is weird, but I have to say that I did experience one manager who I legitimately made this complaint about. He would walk in every morning and go straight to the girls working in the handwork area and be super friendly. Bring them coffee, lots of cheerful greetings, then walk to my station. I'd say good morning and he'd grunt and walk on by. Never a friendly word to me, but constant friendliness to the girls. I was fully competent in my job, by the way, still am. After a few months of this, I was called into a meeting with his boss for a regular interview, and he asked me why I wasn't seeming happy with the manager. I told him. Next day, the manager comes to me and we had a long talk in his office, during which he told me he realized, only after being asked about it by his boss, that he was totally treating me like crap every morning. He apologized, stopped fraternizing with the girls, and has treated me fine ever since. So sometimes, rarely, this is a bit of a big deal. I'd say the issue you experienced wasn't just so-and-so doesn't say hello to me. It was so-and-so treats me notably different and worse than my colleagues performing an identical job function, and the difference in treatment appears to be based on gender. The former is a BS complaint. The latter is quite significant. This was about 10 years ago. A guy in accounts pretended his wife had died. He faked her funeral, took compassionate leave, quite a lot of extra leave, as his wife was Indian and he claimed he had to go to India to sort out her estate. He was given £500 from an office collection. Unfortunately, he hadn't let his wife in on the scam, and she had phoned the office looking for him one afternoon. I believe the complaint that came in from his supervisor was, "You know X's wife has died? Well, I just had a phone call from the afterlife." He was fired on the spot, sued for his extra leave, and is the reason we ask grieving workers for death certificates before we allow any extra paid time off. "Oh no, sorry, I meant my other wife." I mean, saying your grandmother died is one thing, but what was his plan? You can only fake your wife's death for so long. Oh, we had a guy like that. Never could prove that this stuff didn't happen, but apparently his wife, girlfriend, it changed from day to day, his 18-year-old son and his dad all had a stroke in the same month. Then his mum died, then he leaves one morning saying his dad is back in hospital. He shows back to work around 1 saying, "Yeah, I just had to pull the plug on my dad. Not an easy thing to do," but seemed totally unfazed otherwise. We were able to prove that he was going out to his car several times a day to drink, but I feel like having 3 family members all have strokes, and 2 of them not being of stroke-having age, and then having both of your parents die all within 2 months is a little suspicious, especially when you can just casually pull the plug on your dad. Also, we weren't able to find any records of obituaries or death certificates anywhere. And the funeral home he said they were having the funerals at didn't list anyone that could be his parents as having funerals the 2 dates he took off work. So either he was a bald-faced liar, or he was the most unlucky man in the world for a short period. I'm as amazed by the gall of these particular people as I am disgusted by the behavior, to be honest. I used to help my HR team in organizing a summer event for families. Nothing special, just a grill party for employees with some extra events for children. This was a large company of around 300 employees. A week before the event, one guy raised ape crap hell because we chose a date when his daughter was on summer camp. You should have told him that was exactly why you chose the date. Summer camp sounds more fun anyways, honestly. Some people are so entitled. One woman in the US sued a school because her daughter had something else she wanted to do on prom night. So unbelievably, they sued the school to change the prom night. Because frick everyone else, the only thing that matters or has a life is me and my family. My company has had some serious what the frick moments. Take down the pictures of World War II airplanes because our German customers might take offense. Had a phantom crapper who wrote "F you" on the wall in feces and laid one in a newly installed toilet. It wasn't even plumbed in yet, they just crapped in a waterless toilet and left it for someone else to sort out. We had a guy who got caught sleeping at work for the 3rd time. When the shift leader gave him a talking to, the guy complained to HR that he was being victimized. During the subsequent investigation, it was found via CCTV that the worker was going to his car and doing smack. This was confirmed in a positive substance test. These are just some of the ones that jump out at me. Not what you would expect in a multi-billion-dollar aerospace engineering company. A letter of complaint. The doctor called me fat. I looked up the patient weight. Patient was unambiguously fat. BMI of 50+. The doctor was giving results of positive tests for non-alcohol-related fatty liver disease and corresponding dietary advice. Wrote the patient a non-apology letter, gently hinting that choice of words was not ideal but perhaps some of the doctor's advice was good. Dear patient, the doctor misspoke. He meant to say morbidly obese. The doctor misspoke. He meant to say, "There she blows. Man the harpoons." I'm picturing Dr. House apologizing this way. My mum, who works for the state, had to deal with an employee who was catching pigeons at work property and then taking them home to barbecue them. I have a huge list. A manager who complained that a guy's accent was too thick. After speaking with the manager, who frequently uses politically incorrect slang, and the heavily accented gentleman, I can honestly say the manager was the issue and that guy didn't even have a very thick accent. A guy kissing his girlfriend hello after finishing work. This was reported as a homophobic act. A guy who kept asking people if they were on break at the same time, as he likes to pray with them. Frequently. A woman calling herself the B-word and another employee reporting her for insulting an employee. Yes, the actual complaint stated that she called herself the B-word. A girl complaining that another guy was stalking her every night. She would ask a guy to escort her to her car. It was the same guy. That one was weird. She actually used his parking space at his house to save money since he lived close to work. She then later complained that he stopped letting her do this. I can only assume due to the stalking complaint. A manager reporting every single one of his employees in his branch for coming in late. Turned out he had told them to come to work an hour early, unpaid, but they came in 15 to 30 minutes early instead, unpaid, so he tried to write them all up. A male customer called his boyfriend so gay. When the employee told him not to be homophobic, he replied they're gay and lovers. She then asked for them to kiss to prove it. That one had a ton of people in stitches over how this woman literally lives a Futurama skit life. Might not be Futurama, but I swear I've seen a show where two people pretend to be gay and do a super awkward kiss. What size of company do you have to run for these things to happen with this frequency? Or is real life actually like the Office TV show? Also, I think the cartoon that last person was thinking of was Family Guy. One of my favorites from the other half who is in HR. So Mr. Blue and Miss Pink work together for some time. At some point, their inter-office flirting becomes too much for Miss Pink, and she goes to HR. Apparently, Mr. Blue has been sending her texts and making overtures that the married Miss Pink does not want and needs to stop. Mr. Blue is pulled into HR and they go over his behavior. He's going to be suspended while they determine if he'll be terminated. It's correctly pointed out that this is very inappropriate behavior. He seems to understand, but something is off with him. Then he asks, "Is she saying she didn't want me to do this?" "Yes," comes the answer. "This isn't something that coworkers do. You're single and don't understand the full scope of what's going on." Hold on a sec. Mr. Blue pulls out his phone and shows a text of Miss Pink with her, undressed, spread eagle along with a steamy note. Then another and another. "I'll send them to you for your research." HR regroups, ends the meeting and does more investigation. Turns out they'd been doing the deed for months. The husband was getting suspicious and she needed an out. They both got disciplined by HR, though her marriage fell apart and she had to carry the knowledge with her that most of HR had seen her naughty bits. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. The most what the heck complaint I've seen is finger guns being banned in a workplace. Someone complained that they felt threatened by someone making finger guns in the air and filed a complaint. And I guess since that was creating a hostile work environment for that employee, they had to send a memo that it was unacceptable behavior. I guess it's all how you imagine it. Most people make them all friendly and nice, but maybe you're alone in the office and Mike, who's made it clear he really doesn't like you, walks in, stands in front of you, glowers and stares you in the eye, slowly raises his double-barreled finger gun, levels it at your face, pulls the imaginary trigger, turns away, and quietly goes about his business without ever saying a thing. Is that HR worthy? In my humble opinion, I think you need to wink if you do the finger guns, otherwise it is hostile. Not HR, but a friend who owned his own company told me about having to fire a guy for picking up a working girl in the marked company vehicle. It amazes me that people seem to forget they're representing the company when driving a company car. Whenever I drive one, I'm the most cautious, courteous driver on the road. Always following speed limits, letting people merge when they want, not cutting people off, no phone while driving, but I feel like I'm constantly seeing others in a company car that are some of the most aggressive and horrible drivers doing the exact opposite of me. It's just kind of like, why would I ever want to buy something from your company when you act like that? They don't work for Bang Bus then. I know the people in HR pretty well. My work used to let people dress up for Halloween each year. Company is about 350 people in size. People used to have a blast. There would be parties and contests for costumes and pumpkin carving, etc. I would guess about 65 to 70% of the building would get really into it every year. One lady complained to HR that some of the costumes were upsetting to her because they were satanic. We're talking vampires here, folks. Fricking Dracula. Like the classic teeth, black cape, white skin template vampire we all know. That was the end of Halloween for the entire building. I hate that B word. I would distribute pentagram necklaces and encourage people to join me in worshipping the Dark One, just to get her back for that nonsense. If someone can show me where vampires appear in the Bible and personally attack the various protagonists, maybe I'd say they have a fringe case, but even then, who cares? Silly, bored Bible Karens. The new recruitment manager was sending inappropriate and very explicit text messages to female job seekers. You know what? He didn't last very long. He didn't last long in what sense? In my office, there was a huge deal of who kept finishing the pot of coffee without starting a new one. Let me tell you, some office workers had to go 4 or 5 minutes without coffee, which caused chaos.
I'm thinking it was you.
I've done a lot of bad things in my life, but I would never leave a coffee pot empty. Did you do those bad things because some F-word left the coffee pot empty? Chewing too loud, typing too loud, had to go home because it's cold, hottest month on record and the AC in the server room next room over is dying, and they can hear him. Direct quote. Apparently, he was laughing from across the building, not loudly, and they were not okay with it. I once lightly tossed the keys to a fellow employee. It's something I often do, but this particular employee didn't like me. Later on, I was asked by my manager why I threw the keys at my coworker. Apparently, my coworker told them that I got angry and huffed and chucked the keys at his chest. I was utterly flabbergasted that I was considered to be the one in the wrong. When asked the standard, "What should you do next time to make sure this didn't happen again?" I didn't know what to answer. I considered answering that maybe my coworker shouldn't be such a wussy B-word. Luckily, my team leader stepped in and told me the right answer was not to toss the keys next time. After the meeting, I busted up laughing. It became something of a running joke with my other coworkers whenever we tossed the keys to each other.
Next time, make a point by slowly placing the keys on the floor and backing away slowly. You might get another complaint, but that would be funny.
We had an issue with scented things in our office. Some people had a sensitivity and there was little airflow, so if someone sprayed something, they had issues. But that's not the bad part. It ended up being a feud between two sections that had to be mediated by HR. On the sensitive side, there was a supervisor who looked for reasons to write up those who might be wearing something scented. She tried to write up someone for wearing a scented deodorant and someone else for carrying scented lotion in their purse.
That person hadn't even opened it, by the way. It didn't help that the sensitive one liked to claim a migraine and go home if she even suspected someone was wearing a scent. They ended up stopping the whole issue by setting a trap and monitoring the scent of some new lotion. They all talked about how good it smelled. Strangely, the sensitive one got a migraine and the entire group was called into the office to be written up because even the supervisor could smell the non-existent lotion in her office. When called out on it, HR had to come in and put a stop to the whole issue. I understand that people have sensitivity to smells. I'm one of them. Old lady perfume makes me have an asthma attack, and the beginning of it was reasonable. People followed the rules. But this turned into a witch hunt on one side with someone taking advantage of it. At one point, the supervisor demanded to search people's purses and bags to make sure they weren't bringing in scented items. Didn't even have to be using them. HR did have to tell her that it was illegal, though. It's funny how tribal people can become in the workplace over a prolonged period of time. Boredom and perceived injustices can combine to mutate into some truly absurd fights. HR worker here. There's always the standard stuff. I got gypped on paid time off, overtime, and hours. Some of my other things are an employee stealing a work truck and driving to a gambling town, pawning work tools in said truck, gambling all the money away, getting drunk, crashing said work truck, falling asleep at the wheel, and found by the cops in the morning. He then complained that none of it was specifically forbidden in the handbook. We offered him Cobra because it was cheaper than proving in a hearing that his actions fell under gross incompetence. One lady cashed her check twice by mobile deposit, then taking it to a check cashing place. Once the company asked if we could make the 401k waiting period 10 years. Another guy took a loan against his 401k for custom motorcycle parts. That's not a complaint, it's just wow. I had a guy complain that we took too much for child support. He had 6 orders, a different lady each. That mother fricker was fertile. A pregnant EE who sat right by the break room every day and complained about the lady microwaving salmon for lunch. Every fricking day. Spoiler, it was me who complained. Had a voicemail from a former employee complaining that he was fired for bullcrap reasons. I saved that voicemail for a long time. But the one that takes the cake
A flirty married jerk at work winking at ladies, but he's connected so he gets a small talking to. The behavior stops. That's good, right? The receptionist doesn't show up to work. Then we get a call from the receptionist's husband. Turns out she was sleeping with that flirty jerk and doing crystal at work. It shouldn't have caused such a huge ruckus, but the flirty jerk is married to the owner's sister, plus Crystal. She's in rehab and the flirty jerk has to tell his wife that it happened in their own bed. That spongy mofo wouldn't even spring for a cheap motel. I'm in HR. I've had a few what the heck complaints. Employee complained about other people's perfume affecting her allergies but wore heavy perfume herself. She said everything outside her home gave her allergies. With a doctor's note, she was allowed to work from home, but was more than happy to come to company events and get wasted. Yeah, that makes total sense. We also had an employee who was abrasive, rude, arrogant, and actively tried to get people fired, and he was a little too flirtatious with women as well. There were several complaints about the guy. The what the heck part of it was no matter how much documentation we collected about him, the executives refused to discipline him because he'd been at the company for 20 or more years, and had a unique wealth of knowledge that would be extremely hard to replace. We also had an executive who scared her department so much that people were afraid to use the bathroom. If some people took maybe a minute too long in the bathroom, the supervisors grilled the person about where they were and sometimes penalized them for that. The supervisors were under so much pressure from the exec, it took a long time because people were too afraid, but finally, some people came forward to us about the issue, and we put a stop to it immediately. HR is an interesting world, but it can be very stressful and at times lonely. Where I work, we have mandatory inappropriate behavior prevention training. The person who teaches it told us that they had, in the recent past, received some complaints about people holding the door open for them. The lady felt she was getting harassed because of it. They mentioned they didn't do anything about it except try to explain to the lady that the person was more than likely just being nice. I was threatened with a write-up for that once. The lady was walking down the hall with a container of documents in her arms. I was next to the door and held it. She even thanked me. A couple of days later, I was brought into the HR office with my manager and told my conduct was perceived as sexist. They had a write-up for me and I decided not to get pushed around. I told them I was being polite to someone with an armload of stuff, and unless the person who complained is going to do my job for them when I quit, they'd better tear that up. My manager and the HR rep had a talk, and the write-up was misplaced, never to be seen again. I don't know if that lady I held the door for was the one who complained. Probably someone else who wanted to stir the pot in the office. Talking to an employee about underperformance and she complains because I wasn't telling her how great she is after every text she sent. One of our biggest customers is a large electronics manufacturing company in France and the UK. We regularly get visits from them for meetings about something or other. At one such meeting, one of the visitors told us about Steve. Steve was always vanishing during lunch break and nobody knew where he went until he was discovered in the toilets one day. Another toilet user noticed a foot twitching beneath the cubicle door and called out, receiving no answer, so they tried the door and obviously it was locked. Fearing the worst, he went for help. The first aider came back with him and called, no answer, so he entered the adjacent cubicle, stood on the bog, and looked over the partition wall. Steve was whacking away like his life depended on it. He received a warning for that. A few weeks later it happened again, only this time it was a female first aider who got a free show. A month later it happened a third time, only this time Steve didn't plug his earphones into his smartphone properly, and so was broadcasting the guttural sounds of a hardcore adult flick throughout the toilet. This was Steve's third and final warning, and he was fired. He claimed unfair dismissal on the grounds that nowhere in the employee handbook does it say that what he was doing was forbidden on company grounds, and it was during his own time and not during work time, and he ended up getting his job back. What is the most chaotic good act that you've ever witnessed? My former employer had a metered parking lot. The lot was heavily monitored and they'd ticket you like the minute your crap expired. It was decidedly not good for business. People want to be able to linger in a coffee shop, you know? Besides, there was no reason for that lot to be metered anyhow. It was barely even adjacent to anything but our shop. Well, the meter just started breaking. All the time. It would get fixed by the city, but then a few days later, it'd be smashed or jammed or whatever. We asked if people would be towed, and the city was like, no meter, no ticket. One night I stayed a bit late to clean a freezer. When I left, I spotted my boss breaking the freshly fixed meter. She was like, "Yep, guess I'm a criminal, huh?" I once counseled one of my students in my homeroom to quit school, get a GED, and enroll in an apprenticeship program. Had I been caught, I would have been fired, since policy was to try and motivate all students to graduate. The kid was failing all of his classes, which were 9th grade courses, but he was smart, working a full-time job, and was already 18 years old and had a crappy home life. Honestly, that's the smartest path for a determined and hardworking kid who doesn't thrive in academia. Good for you. He probably makes good money and has a stable job now. I hope so. He didn't take the advice right away. As long as he was enrolled as a full-time student, his family kept getting a payout from funds due to his father's earlier death. He only came to school because his mum needed that payout to help raise his younger siblings. He planned to keep it up until he aged out of the funding thing in a few years, and then he could finally quit coming to school, get a GED, change jobs to something 9 to 5 finally. So he and I made a sort of pact of, if I don't harass you about your schoolwork, will you at least pretend that I do try to get you to do your schoolwork so that the principal doesn't figure out that I let you sleep in my class? I'll let you sleep all you need because I know you work late and you care about your little siblings. Meanwhile, here are practice materials for the GED. Do them when you can so you don't forget anything. As soon as you can do it, go and take that test. This confused a few classmates since they knew I wouldn't allow them to sleep in class even though I allowed him to do so without penalty. This was back in the late 1950s when my granddad was just a teenager, 14 to 15 years old, and he lived in a rural area in Arizona. This relatively new family in town was arousing suspicion because the wife and kids were always banged up. My grandpa's stepfather spoke to the man of the house and told him that people could see what he was doing to his family and he needed to stop. When he didn't stop, my grandpa's stepdad excused himself for dinner one night and left the house for the evening. The following day on the way to school, my granddad was on the bus and drove across a field where Family Man McGee was tied to one of the posts, beat to holy heck. My granddad, the bus driver, and the older student helped untie the guy and got him onto the bus so that he could get back home. No one talked about it, but apparently my grandpa's stepdad and a couple of other local guys caught up to the guy and beat the crap out of him so that he'd know how his defenseless family had it. Saying he excused himself paints such a good picture of him politely dabbing the corners of his mouth with his napkin and slowly pushing back from the table, just to go and grab this dude and whip his butt. Haha, dope. This is indeed a satisfying story, one that we should probably try and replace with getting the cops and CPS involved in the modern day and age, though. When I used to walk home from class at night, there's this guy that would always call me gangster, major respect, but never anything else. For the reference, I'm a 19-year-old short Hawaiian girl and not very threatening looking. We'll call this guy JD. He'd ask how my day was, if I'm getting home okay, if I had any problems getting home. I began to look forward to it when I was walking home from class. A couple of times I'd be having a bad day, and this guy, who was outside, rain or shine, would always say hi to me. One day I was walking back, and he was talking to a buddy. Said buddy looked over at me and whistled, to which JD whacked him on the shoulder and said angrily, "Show some respect," and smiled at me and said, "Hope you have a good night, gangster. I hope he's doing all right." That video of the guy picking up litter thrown out of his car before physically throwing the passenger out. Threw into a park, turned on his hazard lights, waved the vehicle behind to alert them, and finally picked up and throwing out the trash. I don't care if it's staged or real, it was a delight to watch. A friend of mine had a roommate that stole a painting that was given to my friend. The roommate claimed that it was his and refused to return it, so I broke into their house at 2 in the morning and stole the painting back. I didn't tell anyone and kept it at my house until the roommate moved out. My friend and his painting are now reunited. The kid who stole it was a real piece of work. He would do this kind of stuff to everyone. Multiple people that I know have had this complaint about him, and he also brags about stealing stuff from people. The painting was given to my friend as a present while he lived with the roommate for the first time. They both moved out at different times but chose to live together in a new house. During the moving process, the roommate took the painting and hid it from my friend for weeks. Then at the new place, he revealed the painting to my friend and explained that he wouldn't be giving it back. I caught wind of this story and decided to take matters into my own hands. The city of Sao Paulo never cleaned its tunnels, so they got black from all the cars' fumes over the years. This guy cleaned skull drawings in the soot using a rag and some water. The city sent officials to try and stop him, but hey, he was cleaning, no vandalism there. Eventually they sent someone with a hose to clean this guy's vandalism for good, only to discover how dirty the walls truly were.
That reminds me of the one where people spray-painted wangs on potholes in the road to force the city to fix them faster.
Something similar is happening in Cologne in Germany. They have these incredibly dirty walls, so some people took it upon themselves to do art with pressured sand. The city is against it, so they cleaned the parts of the walls where there is art. It's called reverse graffiti. If the city catches you, they fine you, since it's treated like real graffiti. There was a guy in my historical town of 800 people named Casey. Casey was the town police. We didn't have an actual police force, just the sheriffs from the county an hour away. So Casey was the law. He rode around on his bike, beating up people who did things like break into cars or harass people. Now, Casey himself wasn't exactly an upstanding citizen. He moved around a lot and dabbled in crystal, he grew huge green herb plants in the anise fields behind town, and was generally the kind of guy who looked shady. Except everyone in town knew Casey and everyone trusted him completely. If someone had a problem with the admittedly large population of crystal heads in town, they'd go find Casey and he'd bash heads in and shame people until they either left or towed the line. Imagine an incredibly white trash paladin with a series of crippling vices and a children's bicycle, and you have Casey. Casey also made wax out of green herb in his spare time. This is unsurprising because Casey can make literally anything. Anyway, I'm out of town one day and Casey comes knocking on my door looking to share his new bounty. When I don't answer the door, he decides to leave me some. A normal person would have put the wax on some waxed paper or in a container and then left it on my porch. Not Casey. Casey smeared a very generous amount of green herb wax all over my metal doorknob. Being Casey, he forgets to leave a note to tell me he did this. I came home late that night and put my hand on the doorknob and ended up screaming at my lungs because it was unexpectedly sticky. It was good wax though. About the Great British Bake Off hosts. When contestants do cry, out of frustration or disappointment generally, Mel and Sue stand near them and use unairable language so the embarrassing footage is tainted and won't make it into the final edit. And strangely enough, I've heard that the unairable language is predominantly brand names rather than cursing. Imagining Mel and Sue having an entire conversation completely in brand names, simultaneously ruining footage and making the upset contestant laugh. Two older British women standing next to a man crying over a souffle just chanting the C word over and over. I love this image and I will think of it whenever I'm feeling low. Thank you, imaginary versions of Mel and Sue. When I was in high school, I was an extremely troubled teen. Legal trouble, substance usage, violence, mental illness, failing every class, the whole gamut. When I was in 11th grade, I was put into a special education program for people like me. And I did wonderfully. I adored my teachers and vice versa. One teacher in particular was amazing. She helped me set goals, get on track. She even helped me find my first real job. My senior year, I was doing really well in my classes, but this school was set up like a college in that you needed a set amount of credits to graduate, and I was woefully short. I still needed something like 22 or 24 credits, completely impossible to make up in my last year. Even though I was doing well, there was no chance I was going to graduate. So my lovely teacher started digging through my record. She somehow converted my community service, treatment stays, lockup time, and all the consequences for my behavior into credits. She turned institutionalization into fricking elective credits. By the end of my senior year, I had 1/2 credit to make up in summer school. I was able to walk with my class for graduation in June and received my high school diploma in August. To this day, I have no idea how she did it, but she absolutely changed my life. Thank you, Mrs. Johnson. A Brazilian substance trafficker has been praised on social media as the modern-day Robin Hood after he kidnapped 2 nurses, stole vaccines and syringes, and ordered the medical staff to inoculate residents in one of the poorest areas in the country's southeast. Thomas Vieira Gomez has made headlines in the local press for acts of charity over the past year, even as authorities have issued successive warrants for his arrest. His most recent gesture of generosity to combat yellow fever, which has swept poverty-stricken areas of Brazil, has seen him lauded primarily as a hero rather than a villain. The substance gang leader, known on the street as 2N, held hostage 2 nurses from a vaccination center before transporting them and their equipment to one of the poorest favelas in Rio de Janeiro. The Latin American television station Telesur reported that Gomez's gang oversaw the nurses as they administered vaccinations over a 2-hour period in the Salgueiro favela. Once they'd finished administering the injections, they were returned to their workplace. In a report on the incident, the health workers said their kidnappers had treated them well and without any aggression. They said they'd complied with the hostage takers because many Salgueiro residents hadn't been given access to immunization centers. Despite the illegality of Gomez and his gang's actions, officials have praised the hostage-taking. Carlos Mink, a state deputy and a former minister of the environment, wrote on Twitter that the immunizations had been done as an act of public service. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I once caused traffic to come to a standstill on a 5-lane highway because a dog was running around and narrowly avoiding being hit several times. I pulled my car to the shoulder and jumped out to try and get the dog off the highway. Seeing this, several people got out of their cars to help. After about 10 minutes of us trying to chase this dog off the highway, the owner comes and the dog jumps right into her car. Everyone else gets in their car and leaves while I'm talking to the very relieved owner who couldn't believe all of these people got out to try and save her dog. Once she gets in her car and leaves, I realize I'm on the opposite side of a 5-lane highway from my car and no one is stopping to let me pass. Finally, a trucker must have noticed my predicament and starts cutting off traffic and slows down so that I could walk to get to my car. Another trucker follows suit and I'm able to get back to my car and back on the road. It wasn't until later that I realized how dangerous what I had done had been, but it was worth it to see the owner reunited with her dog. In conclusion, rallied an army of motorists to try and save a runaway dog. I was at a psychedelic rock concert in New York City that involved quite a bit of light moshing and crowd surfing. A really fun show overall. If you've never crowd surfed before, there's 2 main ways that it's usually done. Either you get up on the stage and jump off hoping that the crowd will catch you, or you ask a couple of strong-looking people around you to just lift you up. But at this concert, there was a third way. There was a big intimidating-looking guy in the middle of the mosh pit who apparently spent the entire concert down on all fours, getting people to jump off his back and start crowd surfing. He especially tried to wave in people who seemed nervous to try it. Overall, he must have gotten at least 50 people to crowd surf who had never tried it before. It was really a magical sight to behold. A guy at the local Dunkin' Donuts has to throw out donuts after someone tried to sue them for donating poisoned donuts or whatever. He gladly throws them out and then walks back inside. Whatever happens to them isn't any of his business, since it's trash anyway. He says he stopped trying to catch the mysterious garbage thief after 30 seconds of trying because he isn't paid enough to care.
At the Dunkin' Donuts my brother worked at, a homeless guy would politely stand next to the dumpster. The employee would place the bag of expired donuts in the dumpster and close the lid, then homeless guy would open the dumpster and take them out. It was on video and the manager required that the rules be followed. It was very lawful neutral. I think this would really be lawful good. The employees obey the rules and the homeless man would wait until protocol had been followed and everyone benefited. In case anyone is wondering, yes, the narrator chose the topic that made him think about Dungeons & Dragons the most. What can I say? I'm obsessed. My grandma was a kindergarten teacher for 50 years. Yes, you heard that correctly. She retired at the mandatory age of 72. It was a small community, mostly economically okay, but some poverty. Every few years, Grandma would develop a case of the clumsy. She'd trip while watering plants, and wouldn't you know it, but she'd spill a bit of water on the child that was unwashed and wore the same clothes for weeks. Nothing for it but to make up for the mistake by giving him a bath and clean clothes. Then return the clothes she messed up after she had cleaned them. A case of clumsy would last the whole school year, and oddly enough, she'd tripped near the same child every time. The case of clumsy often meant that she miscounted her grandchildren every morning and made an extra lunch. You there, would you mind taking this lunch so it doesn't go to waste?
There was this Thai infomercial about a lady who owns a marketplace, and she went to visit the people who rented her place and just started getting angry and wreaking havoc, breaking weighing scales, etc. She was filmed by the buyers and the video went viral and all these negative comments. Turns out the sellers she was angry with were playing tricks with the customers, like using rigged weighing scales, starting with 1 kilo. Wanksy would spray paint wangs around potholes so the government would fix them.
Some people plant trees in potholes for the same reason.
Be the change you want to see in the world. This one actually happened yesterday at work. A girl and her mum came in and got a few sandwiches, but the girl wanted a brownie. They were paying cash, but were like $3 short for the brownie. The girl didn't throw a fit or anything, but was pretty sad. I was just gonna let them take it, it's just a brownie, but before I can say anything, the guy behind them says, "I would like all but 5 of your brownies." Mind you, this is like 40 fricking brownies, which costs like $110 of just brownies. He proceeded to give the girl all of the brownies, and she needed 3 bags just to carry all of them. The girl was ecstatic, and everyone else was laughing their butts off. We'll never forget you, brownie man. I've never seen it personally, but I rather like Richard Ancrom's guerrilla public service. There was a sign on the freeway in Los Angeles area that was providing confusing directions, so he fabricated an overlay to Caltrans standards and installed it himself without any sort of government permission. Caltrans eventually found out, inspected it, and allowed it to stay. I like that eventually turned out to be almost a decade. My parents stole my neighbor's dog and rehomed it because they were mistreating it. My parents did this with a cat. The neighbor was throwing rocks at the cat because he didn't want the cat in the house. My dad confronted him and said, "F you, this is our cat now," and took the cat home. Our old tenants had a 14-year-old, declawed, flea-infested, super sweet kitty. She was so tiny, and when we kicked them out, he was going to just release the cat into the wild. So my dad said, "Go F yourself," and we took her in. She infested all of our other pets with fleas, but it was worth it. She got to live until 17 with us. So, you know how you'll have childhood friends, and eventually they go their separate ways, but you still stay in touch. My brother had a friend who got into crystal and had this little 8-pound, 8-month-old puppy. He would get high, blow smoke in the puppy's face, treat him badly, etc. One day he told a third friend from the group, "Man, I can't take care of this thing anymore. I'm just gonna dump him on the side of the road." So the second friend basically goes, "No, F that," and steals the dog the night before. A week goes by and he's being fostered at the good guy dog thief's house. He then asks my brother, "Hey man, your brother want a dog?" I have a 9-pound wiener dog, who at the time could use a friend since I worked 9 hours a day and my wiener could be all alone. So of course I said, "Yeah, let's go visit this guy." I show up and unlock the back gate and am immediately met at eye level with 3 Great Danes. And running around in the bushes is this comically small, long-haired mutt. We go inside and I sit on the couch and the pup runs right up to me, gets in my lap, rolls over for a belly rub. It's like the guy never grew up in a crystal house. Needless to say, my wiener has a friend now. There's a group that does guerrilla ramp building to help with those mobility issues around the city. They've stepped up in so many of the areas that the city and businesses have been ineffective in maintaining code in, or outright illegally ignored it, to the detriment of citizens. I freaking love them and I donate to them whenever I can. The next is the guys who spray paint wangs all over potholes so the city has to come out and fix them. If I see them doing this in real life one day, I'm stopping traffic to A, help, B, kiss them, because thank you. When I was still in my medical training in LA, I often saw a middle-aged gentleman putting coins into expired meters. The one time I saw a meter maid try to approach him and he ran off giggling. A few months later I saw him at a stop sign in a Maserati, basically the definition of chaotic good. This is a bizarre pseudo-crime with an illustrious history actually, as one commenter lays out. Paying meters for random strangers ahead of the meter enforcement personnel was part of a strange court case in my state recently. Basically, these college kids would walk around town just ahead of parking enforcement personnel, who were trying to issue tickets and feed the expired meters so no tickets could be written. This cost the city tens of thousands of dollars in tickets, so the city went after the kids for harassment. Lo and behold, after the city spent nearly $80K in legal expenses, the kids won because they were paying the meters and there's no law against that. I worked in daycare, and over the summer the kids had to bring their own lunch. One extremely undernourished and developmentally behind toddler only got things like chocolate frosting between slices of white bread for lunch. I started packing extra of my own lunch, with healthy stuff like yogurt and fresh vegetables, and sat her on my lap each lunchtime and coaxed her to eat it. It was totally against the rules and probably illegal, but the lead teacher and I couldn't just sit there and watch her literally eat frosting for lunch, so I got permission to take over myself. We just kept it quiet. I teach English as a foreign language to high schoolers. I have one class where the class clown is always trying to be disruptive, but his method is to shout encouragement whenever someone answers a question, like, "You a genius," or "You so intelligent." I have to act annoyed, because I know he'll stop doing it if he ever knew how much I freaking love it. Friend's mother found out her husband, my friend's father, was part of a group that made inappropriate content featuring children when the police showed up to arrest him. He had realized that they were about to get him, so was trying to escape the country via the local airport. He had told her his mother was sick and he was going to visit. She not only told the police where he was, but raced them to him, slide-tackled him at the airport before he disappeared, and was in the process of beating him to a pulp when the police arrived and pulled her off him. When my ex was arrested in front of our house for a similar offense, I said something along the lines of, "I want to kick his ass." The cop turned to me and with a very serious look on his face said, "Go ahead, we don't mind." That video where a guy paid for everyone's food if they were behind him just because 2 girls cut in front of him. I think it was at In-N-Out. The video's been reposted many times on any social media. Once in grade school, one of the kids was torturing another kid who was on the spectrum. He was running behind him and hitting him with a stick. They both ran right by me and I instinctively stuck my leg out and tripped the bully. He got bloody hands and knees for hitting the concrete. I got detention and a note sent home to my parents. I didn't care. I would have done it again. My parents took me out for ice cream, they were so proud of me. What are some wholesome historical facts not taught in school? In 2006, while the Ivory Coast was in the midst of a civil war, the opposing sides agreed to a ceasefire so they could all watch the World Cup. The break in fighting paved the way for a peace agreement a year later. During the Revolutionary War, a British general left his dog behind during a chaotic retreat. When the Continental Army found the lost dog, George Washington had a messenger go under a flag of truce to return the dog to its owner. Truly a man's best friend. Abraham Lincoln decided to grow a beard because of 11-year-old Grace Bedell. She had written him that she thought he would look more handsome and less sad with a beard, and women would tell their husbands to vote for him. So he grew a beard and was elected. On his way to his inauguration, he took a train and passed through her hometown in Westfield, New York, and met her. There was another great story of him where a rival politician called him two-faced. He came back with, "If I had a second face, do you think I'd pick this one?" The Formula One Grand Prix in 1976. After Niki Lauda crashed while hitting a barrier and catching a light, rival drivers Arturo Mazzario, Guy Edwards, Harold Ertel and Brett Lunger all stopped their cars and ran to Lauda's aid. There are many such instances of this happening during the 50s right through to the 80s, of championship drivers forfeiting a win to save a rival's life. And then he won his second championship the very next year. He also retired from driving, then came back and won another championship 2 years later by half a point. After a crash like he had, most drivers wouldn't be the same after. But not Niki, though. It just made him stronger. Rest in peace, Niki. During World War II, a German fighter pilot spotted a damaged American bomber, and rather than shooting it down, he decided to escort it to safety. Decades later, the two pilots found each other and became friends. There was a documentary some time ago where a man who'd been a Japanese prisoner of war met the Japanese man who'd essentially tortured him for years. After the war, the former Japanese officer had become a devout Buddhist, and upon meeting his former prisoner, he begged for his forgiveness for all the wrongs committed against him. They ended up good friends. That is a story of humbling examples of redemption and grace. I would love to hear how both of them were able to find the strength to take their respective parts in that story. When the pharaoh Mentuhotep II's harem daughter died around 2050 BC, he mourned. She was only 5 years old. Her tomb, touchingly, was inscribed with the pet name Meat. This is translated to kitten. The Candy Bomber. After World War II ended and Berlin was divided, the UK and US dropped food into West Berlin by plane. One pilot, Gail Halvorson, started to donate his candy rations to the children, and soon other pilots started doing the same. To let the children know that it was his plane, the one with the candy, they would wiggle the plane's wings before the drop. Word spread and more children would come, and it started a new PR campaign and started to change the mindset that Americans had of giving food to Europe. I always thought the story was really sweet. This is a pretty common PR move by the American military in modern times. Candy, music, movies, magazines. It's cheap as crap, life-changing to a child who's never had it. Positive feelings towards Americans from childhood. Yeah, but this guy did it of his own initiative, though. He saw a group of kids with nothing by the airport and gave them a few pieces of gum that they split up, and then when they ran out of gum, the kids that didn't get any sniffed the wrapper. He promised to bring more, and when the kids asked him how they'd know it was him, he told them that he'd wiggle his wings. He went back to the base and got a couple of his buddies to pool their candy rations, and he created 3 little parachutes to drop them. Later, the commander found out and gave his support. He didn't end his candy-dropping career in Berlin either, though. In 1994, he persuaded the Air Force to let him drop hundreds of candy bars over Bosnia-Herzegovina as part of Operation Provide Promise. Another, larger drop was planned and executed by Halvorson over Kosovo in 1999. Additional candy drops have been enacted in Japan, Guam, Albania, and across the United States. In 2003 and 2004, he advocated a similar series of candy drops over Baghdad as a humanitarian mission to be a ray of hope, a symbol that somebody in America cares. My friends from the Balkans have told me that the bitter combats of the wars after the breakup of Yugoslavia used to stop because both sides liked watching Mexican soap operas. Ah, Mexican soap operas, the true olive branch. Telenovelas are the best. I watched many drama-filled hours at the laundromat. You don't need to understand a word of Spanish to follow the plot. The India-Pakistan border is one of the most disputed ones in the world, giving rise to the world-renowned hostilities between India and Pakistan. There was a time once, a prominent Indian singer, namely Lata Mangeshkar, had gone to perform a concert for the soldiers there. As soon as the show began, Pakistani troops started firing rounds in the air, yelling obscenities and said, "We want to hear her voice too!" So the Indian forces turned up the speakers and pointed them towards the border. Pakistani forces returned the favor when prominent Pakistani singers came to perform for them. I've heard that Indian and Pakistani soldiers get together to watch the India vs Pakistan cricket matches. The only reason the pilgrims stopped at Plymouth Rock was that they were running out of beer. They had to grow barley and hops. Based on Eric the Red's account, the first ritual done in the New World was when a German Balkan oarsman was found praising the berries identical to the ones used for brewing in his homeland. Ringo Starr once decided the Beatles didn't need him and decided to take a holiday with the intention of never coming back. When John, Paul, and George found out, they went all the way to where he was staying just to convince him to come back. As I recall, he got sick of all the bickering during the recording of the White Album, so it's actually Paul playing the drums in the first few songs. When Ringo came back, his drum kit was all decked out with flowers. Pennsylvania was founded by Quakers, who believed that the light of God shined in everyone regardless of ethnicity or religion. They were known for treating the indigenous people relatively well and welcomed the first synagogue in North America in Philadelphia. That is true. They also created the basis for solitary confinement in prisons, so there are some drawbacks. They didn't think of solitary confinement as extra punishment, but as a period to reflect without distraction and determine to build a better life. The idea was that if time for solitary reflection is good, then 24/7 must be even better. So it was born of good intentions and ivory tower thinking rather than extra sadism. There was a dog in World War I that helped snuff out mustard gas, named Sergeant Stubby. They released a movie about him in 2018, I think. The dog was a stray that joined a man on his deployment to France in World War I and saved the lives of countless American, British, and French soldiers. The Polish army had a gosh darn bear fighting on their side in World War II, Sergeant Wojtek the Bear. He's still on the regiment's coat of arms carrying an artillery shell. A very cute, alcoholic, chain-smoking bear. Wojtek was a bear that served in the Polish 2nd Artillery Unit. During his service, Wojtek was a huge morale boost to the men, fighting multiple men in wrestling matches, eating lit cigarettes, and even foiling a Saudi Arabian plot to attack the camp by discovering a spy in the shower. Wojtek's unit was caught in an artillery battle. He looked around and began carrying artillery shells to the launchers like the men around him. For his service, Wojtek was promoted to corporal and was given an honorable discharge. Wojtek was placed in a local zoo where he was known to appear every once in a while, known to appear at a child's birthday party. Fellow servicemen from his unit were also known to come by and feed him lit cigarettes, where he also sadly died. In his honor, the Polish artillery unit changed its logo to a bear holding an artillery shell. In the Second World War, British Lieutenant General Commander Gerard Broadmead's Roop was posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross because a German admiral who witnessed his gallantry in action wrote to the British and recommended the award. There was a huge fight about African Americans using the public pool in Mr. Rogers' actual neighborhood, so he made an episode on his show where he and an African American guest were sharing a kiddie pool and talking about being nice to people even if they look or sound different. He taught a whole generation that racism isn't fair or right. The actor in the show was supposed to be a police officer, and Rogers actually dried his feet. The entire show was a very gentle and very subtle and ultimately very profound way of saying F you to bigots. During the filming of Gone with the Wind in 1939 on the Atlanta movie set, there was a long line of porta potties, each with a sign that said either white or colored. Lenny Blewett, an African-American extra, went to Clark Gable's dressing room and asked to speak to him. Gable immediately got on the phone and yelled at the director that if the signs weren't taken down, then they didn't have Clark Gable as Rhett Butler. And seeing as filming was put off for 2 years just to get Gable, that was one heck of a threat. Apparently Gable even accepting Blewett to enter his dressing room was considered a big thing, as Blewett was so low down the movie pecking order that he was not even going to be credited. I wonder if people back then complained as much as certain people do today when Hollywood got involved with politics. Oh, let's be honest, they always have and they always will. Besides, during World War II, Qantas Airlines has never had a fatal commercial jet plane crash since its formation in 1921. They've never had a single fatal commercial jet crash and haven't had any fatal propeller plane crashes since 1951. They came close in 2010, though, with Qantas Flight 32. And they give beautiful pajamas. Pugs were bred by the Chinese to sit on the laps of emperors. They were quite literally designed to be lazy. The official breed of the House of Orange was the pug. This was because Prince William was alerted to Spanish assassins by his loyal pug, Pompey. How's that for a backup fact? You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Mr. Rogers always said he was feeding his fish out loud because he heard that a little girl who was blind was worried about them, so he audibly said it so she wouldn't have to worry about it anymore. Not really a historical figure, but one that we all know. Mr. Rogers definitely counts as a historical figure, and you can't change my mind. John Stark, one of the rescuers of the remaining survivors of the Donner Party. Apparently, this 220-pound beast of a man rescued all 9 children by carrying them out of a deep sunken snow pit, and laughed and joked with them the whole time. In Summit Valley, the remaining rescuers discussed what to do and took a vote to only save 2 of the children in starved camp. That might have been all they could manage. The others would have to stay behind. John Stark would not abide that. That meant 9 people, mostly children, would die on the mountain, exposed to elements down in a very deep hole in the snow. John Stark decided he'd save all 9. Already shouldering a backpack with provisions, blankets, and an axe, he picked up 1 or 2 of the smaller children, carried them a little ways, then went back for the others. Then he repeated the process again and again and again. To galvanize morale, he laughed and told the youngsters they were so light from months of mouse-sized rations that he would carry them all simultaneously if only his back were broad enough. Once they were out of the snow, he would eat and rest, he said, but not before. He saved all 9. James Breen, one of those in the pit at Starved Camp, later said, "To his great bodily strength and unexcelled courage, myself and others owe our lives. There was probably no other man in California at that time who had the intelligence, determination, and what was absolutely necessary to have in that emergency." After Commodore Perry forced the opening of Japan to foreign trade, Japan signed many unequal treaties with Western nations. The 1888 Mexican-Japanese Treaty was the first time a Western nation treated Japan as an equal. In the late 1930s, fascism was advancing through the world and no one dared oppose it. Except for Mexico. Mexico was the only country that openly protested against the Japanese invasion of Manchuria, the Italian invasion of Ethiopia, Italian and German involvement in the Spanish Civil War, along with the USSR, and finally, the German annexation of Austria. In Vienna, we named the square Mexikoplatz, Mexican Square, in honor of Mexico being the only country that protested the Third Reich's annexation of Austria. Horton Hears a Who was written for a Japanese friend of Dr. Seuss immediately following World War II. He wrote it as an allegory about the importance of forgiveness and humanity, in a time where much of the world was still bitter at Japan for their role in the war. Horton represents the United States who speaks up for Whoville, the Japanese, to remind them that a person is a person no matter how small. During the Crusades, when Richard the Lionheart had a fever, all he wanted at the moment was some fruit and a cold drink. His enemy, Saladin, the Sultan of Egypt who had seized control over Jerusalem, heard the news and sent him peaches, pears, and a shipment of ice from a mountain. When he heard that King Richard's horse had been killed, he sent him a bunch of new horses and a stable boy. When boys were shipwrecked on a deserted island, they actually did a great job of solving interpersonal conflict, creating a situation that is essentially the opposite of Lord of the Flies. The boys had set up a small commune with a food garden, hollowed-out tree trunks to store water, a gymnasium with curious weights, a badminton court, chicken pens, and a permanent fire. Kolo fashioned a makeshift guitar from a piece of driftwood, half a coconut shell, and 6 steel wires salvaged from their wrecked boat. They lived better than some of us do. Humans are social animals. We generally don't devolve into chaos unless we have to. In 1952, Albert Einstein declined an offer to become the second president of the State of Israel. Napoleon was once nearly killed by being trampled by hundreds of rabbits. He organized a hunt to celebrate a victory, but the guy got tame rabbits instead of wild ones. Instead of running when released, they looked directly to who they recognized as the guy in charge, Napoleon, because they knew the guy in charge meant food. Long story short, they all charged him. He ran, he got severely trampled and injured. I couldn't make this crap up if I tried. As a history graduate who loves that period, I had no idea that this had happened. It's amazing and totally in keeping with Bonaparte being a magnificent general to the public and kind of ridiculous in his personal life. There is a lion student in Venice that has Viking runes graffiti on it.
The fact that the message is Kilroy was here is so beautiful to me.
Norsemen also wrote graffiti on the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, back when it was called Constantinople. It's taught in Ireland, but I don't know about the US. When we had the potato famine, millions of Irish were dying and emigrating, and the Choctaw tribe heard this, and despite being extremely poor, they managed to raise I think around $200. And now we've helped them out and raised $1.5 million to help them with COVID-19. That's about $6,500 in today's money. There's also a monument in Cork called the Kindred Spirit dedicated to the Choctaw tribe that was built in honor of the tribes. Imagine that kind of togetherness on a worldwide scale. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, there were a few Supreme Court cases about the color of margarine. The dairy industry couldn't compete as well with margarine dyed the color of butter, so some states tried to pass laws saying margarine had to be pink, which the Supreme Court declared unconstitutional. However, they also decided that yellow margarine was defrauding the public, so for a while margarine was sold white with a packet of yellow dye that you could mix in at home. In conclusion, they couldn't believe it wasn't butter. The family responsible for inventing the method of making margarine yellow during production lived close to my old neighborhood. Friends who would visit would ask about their huge house, and I always found it hilarious to explain how they got most of their wealth. Benjamin Franklin loved butterballs. Also, flatulating, naturalism, and doing the deed with old ladies.
I mean, yeah, but who doesn't love those things?
Tutankhamun's most prized possession was his meteoric iron dagger. Museum visitors are impressed by the gold instead.
In Tutankhamun's day, meteoric iron would have been rare on an unimaginable scale, whereas gold was the standard currency every merchant had had. In the present day, anyone with $20 can buy meteoric iron trinkets on Etsy, whereas gold is hardly seen in quantities larger than a ring or necklace. On Christmas Day 1914, both sides of World War I celebrated Christmas together with songs and games. This type of celebration happened over the whole front in Belgium and France. The soldiers talked to each other like they weren't in war together. Many soldiers wrote in their diary that they didn't expect the enemies to be so kind and friendly, and that they wanted to meet with them when the war was over. But a few days later, the leaders of the armies found out about the celebrations and forbid any future meetings between the two sides. There were a few attempts to reconnect during Easter and Christmas, but the soldiers who attempted were punished or killed. An actual true fact about Liechtenstein is that Switzerland accidentally invaded Liechtenstein during a Swiss army exercise, when some soldiers got lost and accidentally walked into Liechtenstein, on 2 separate occasions. So Switzerland has accidentally invaded Liechtenstein twice. The Chicago Public Library originated with a donation of books from Queen Victoria following the Great Chicago Fire. She assumed the city's library had been burned down. Homework was originally a punishment for bad students, and now it's a regular thing. Pirate ships were actually pretty great, relatively speaking. They were very democratic, and pirate crews were pretty well cared for. Also, they took assault against women pretty seriously, i.e., they killed you for it. Also, pirates were really rare. The vast majority of seafaring raiders were privateers, which were basically mercenary ships who were hired by a country to attack the shipping of an enemy nation. If you kept everything for yourself, pirates. If you paid your fair share to your monarch, privateer. There was a Scotsman named Bill Millen who stood on the beaches at Normandy during D-Day, calmly playing the bagpipes as shells and machine gun fire streaked past him. The Germans didn't shoot him because they figured he must have been insane. Pipers had traditionally been used in battle by Scottish and Irish soldiers. However, the use of bagpipes was restricted to rear areas by the time of the Second World War, by the British Army. Lovat, nevertheless, ignored these orders and ordered Millen, then aged 21, to play. When Private Millen demurred, citing the regulations, he recalled later, Lord Lovat replied, "Ah, but that's the English War Office. You and I are both Scottish, and it doesn't apply." When persecuted Zoroastrians from Persia came to the kingdom of Sanjan in the west coast of India as refugees, the king wasn't sure that he wanted to offer them refuge, so he sent them a full glass of milk, implying his kingdom was full. The leader of the Zoroastrians added some sugar to the milk and sent it back to imply the refugees would become part of the kingdom and make it sweeter. They got to stay, and though they're a micro-minority, they're one of the most successful communities which has left its imprint on every aspect of India.
Under a Supreme Court ruling in the 1800s, tomatoes are considered a vegetable because you can't make a dessert out of them. The ruling came from California having tariffs on fruits because at the time it was believed that only people with a bit of wealth could buy fruit, because they're only really used to make a dessert. Tomatoes were part of the tariff, so people protested, and the Supreme Court removed tomatoes from the tariff, meaning they aren't a fruit in the eyes of the law. I was on vacation in Germany over spring break. They have these frog fences. These fences keep the frogs from crossing the roads and getting run over. At the end of the day, somebody comes and gathers the frogs and helps them across the road. Not only in Germany, and fences are not only to keep the frogs safe, but also the drivers. So many frogs might pass a stretch of road that it gets slippery from all the crushed frogs and somebody could get hurt. But where I live, they started installing blue reflectors on the road markers which are designed to warn wildlife, mostly deer, and keep them from running onto the roads. Captain Morgan actually existed. The face of the well-loved rum, Captain Morgan brand, was a real guy. He was a Welsh privateer who fought alongside the English against the Spanish in the Caribbean in the 1660s and 1670s. His first name was Henry, and he was knighted by King Charles II of England. His exact birth date is unknown, but it was sometime around 1635. He died in Jamaica in 1688, apparently very rich.
Henry Morgan is largely regarded as one of, if not the greatest pirates who ever lived.
When you run down the list of notable pirates whose names you recognize today, like Black Bart Roberts, Blackbeard, Captain Kidd, Calico Jack Rackham, Charles Vane, and the others, they all had one thing in common. Not a one of them lived to enjoy much, if any, of their ill-gotten gains. They were either killed in battle, captured and wound up dancing the hempen jig, or left to rot in a gibbet. Henry Morgan actually won the game of piracy, if you consider the end goal to get rich and live the good life, by actually retiring, receiving a royal appointment as governor of Jamaica, bought a plantation, and spent his remaining years actually enjoying his wealth and drinking with his friends. What's an unethical way that people save money? I work downtown, in a city where monthly parking is easily $150 or more per spot. My wife and I both have to drive due to schedules, so it would be double that. Found out that the casino downtown gives you free parking daily if you bet $10. So we go and play roulette daily. She bets $10 on red and I bet $10 on black, and each ask for our parking validation. One of us always wins, which doubles one of the $10 bets. So we get our $20 back. Boom! Free parking. There's been the odd time it's hit zero. In that case, we each just lose $5 each and parking costs us $10 total for the day. I accidentally discovered that the laundry machines in my building take 20 euro-cent coins instead of the $2 coins. The last time I was in Germany, I saved as many as I could, and now a load of laundry costs about 50 cents instead of $4. Imagine the laundromat owner going to collect the change.
Who the frick is depositing euros?
I only found out about it when I paid $2 into the machine and it spat out the 20-cent piece. So somebody else out there is doing it too. They'll never catch me.
I went to Thailand and the 10 baht coin looks nearly identical to the 2 euro coin, so I took a few. If I'm on a festival or in a club, I sometimes pay with them because everything is overpriced and dark anyway. I just don't use it in normal shops. They're around 25 euro cents each, so it's a great return on investment.
I don't get how you guys are able to use similar-sized coins in vending machines. I have enough trouble getting the machine to accept the actually correct coin whenever I try, let alone one that's a bit different. I never got removed from an employee discount plan for a job I left almost 7 years ago. I get 25% off every month on my phone and internet.
Similar but not unethical. My work pays me $40 a month for me to use my phone as my work contact number. My monthly bill is $35.
When I was in 6th grade, they would give IOU slips to anyone that forgot their money for lunch. You were supposed to put your name and they would bill you later. I always wrote Cornelius Origami. My name is not Cornelius Origami. Poor Cornelius Origami. He got charged for so many lunches wrongfully.
The financial burden caused him to eventually fold.
I do like to imagine there's a cartoonish figure in this individual's town who's charged a fortune in lunch fees every month, and his monocle always pops out when he gets hit with the bill. When checking into a hotel, ask if they give Walmart employees a discount. More often than not, you get a 10% discount, and I've never been asked to prove it.
Does this hotel give Walmart employees a discount?
Yes, may I see your employee ID?
I don't really work there, I'm just really curious about their employee benefits.
I still use student discounts whenever I can. Not a student. I graduated in 2013. My senior year, they came up with a new ID card which doesn't expire until 2018.
My college ID doesn't have an expiration date. I've been out of college nearly 4 years now and still use it.
I buy my movie tickets at the automated kiosks in the theater, but I select the senior citizen's price. Spoiler alert, I'm not a senior citizen. The high school kid ripping tickets always gives a slight pause and then decides it's not worth the hassle to call me out on it. In the 90s, I was starting my last year of school. You could have school dinners paid for in advance termly by your parents, or you could bring a packed lunch. I was a packed lunch kid, but if you forgot your packed lunch, you could get a school dinner and pay for it the next day. One day, I forgot my lunch, so I got in the school dinner queue and waited to be served. I thought they'd realize I wasn't a school dinner child and tell me to bring the money tomorrow, but they didn't. The food was actually not bad, and the next day I tried my luck again. They just assumed my parents had paid and nobody bothered to check. I got free school dinners for about a year.
At my school, they had free lunches for kids who were low income, but to avoid embarrassment, they were given cards that looked identical to everyone else's card. The computer would just not charge their account. My friend would just give his card to other people and they'd get free lunch. The system had no check to see if the same card bought 7 lunches in one day.
I haven't bought paper towels in 2 years because I've been stealing napkins from Chipotle every week. I didn't say I ate there, guys, just that I take the napkins, and yes, it's a crappy thing to do, but isn't that kind of the point of this story grouping? Back when payphones were a thing, you could carefully shove the fat McDonald's straws into the change slot in my city and get free calls.
Dollars to dimes, it was a homeless guy that figured this out,
who just thought he'd try taking a sip of whatever fluid might have collected in the payphone's coin reservoir. Hey, you never know. Sneaking into meetings you're not invited to and stealing donuts and kolaches. I pretend that I'm gay. The gym I go to charges $50 less if you register as a couple and not as single. I don't have a significant other, so my best male friend and I registered as a gay couple. The first day, the manager almost asked us to make out to prove it. He decided it was homophobic, so he stopped. When we come in, he's always staring while we use the machines together, like he wants to catch us doing something sexual.
This sounds like the plot for a ruckus buddy comedy.
Starts out with the buds pretending to be a couple for the gym membership. Then they start doing other couple things to save money. Then they realize they're in love.
A Frenchman here. Some people create groups where they give 5 to 10 euros a month. The subway in Paris costs about 60 euros a month. And they use the subway or other public transport without paying. When one of them gets caught, the group uses the money to pay the fine.
So, like an insurance company for fare evasion. I'd be more worried about the guy running it taking the money and disappearing. When we were kids, we discovered the hotel by the beach had a free brunch thing on the top floor every day. You needed to use a keycard in the elevator to access the top floor, but we would go to the floor under it and walk up the last flight. I assume some kind of fire code restriction was why the stairs weren't key-coded. As dumb kids, we were greedy and went too often and got kicked out eventually, but it was nice while it lasted. They had a deal so that their guests could use the pool at the hotel next door too, and no one ever checked, so we would do that as well. I pay for Netflix. I have 3 friends who use the account. They always pay for pizza and snacks at any social gatherings. I've been a bit depressed and haven't spoken with my friend for a few weeks. He just changed the password and I don't want to ask him what it is right away, because it's effed up that I'll only talk to him to get the Netflix password. In high school, I had a good friend who worked solo in a small fast food burger place inside a gas station, East Coast chain called Bullets. I would order a small side of fries and he'd give me $30 worth of chicken fingers, bacon burgers, onion rings, curly fries, etc. Over the summer, large groups of friends would go and order $10 worth of food and 12 people would eat like kings. We did this for years and nothing ever came of it except my friends and I all got fat during the summer, eating 4,000 calories from that place most days. Thanks, Christian, you're a bro. When I was a kid, one of my friend's mothers, a pediatrician, would dilute children's vaccines to save money. Rightfully, she lost her medical license. Jesus Christ! How much would that woman save by doing that? I can't imagine it would be more than one small shopping trip per month. And pediatricians are generally paid all right, aren't they? Insanity. When I got the cooked breakfast option from the canteen at work, you're allowed 5 items. I always take extra bacon and hide it under the beans. That's free bacon.
In a similar note, the food court in my college only allows you to take 1 item out. I take 2 cookies at a time by hiding one in my pocket and eating one as I go out. All for those tasty frickin' cookies.
When I was 8, I went with my mum to set up my first bank account after an uncle gave me £100 as a Christmas gift. He lived abroad, so I didn't see him often. For some reason, they set it up wrong, so the system recorded me as a member of staff. I'm now 29, and I still have the same bank account. And now, I get offered staff rates on loans and credit cards. It's great! Does anyone else use GameStop as a bank? I got really teed off with the US bank because I kept overdrafting my accounts even though I opted out of overdrafting. And the same thing happened with my credit union when I got a debit card. Now whenever I get paid, I go pre-order a whole crapload of games. Whenever I need money, I go to the nearest GameStop and ask for my money back on a game I don't want and make a withdrawal. The lines are shorter at GameStop than at the bank, and I can trade in old games and have money go straight into my savings account. GameStops are just as prevalent as banks in my town, and I work at a mall, so it's even more convenient than running an errand to the bank or using an ATM and getting charged. The GameStop people are starting to catch on that I'm just moving money around and only buying one pre-ordered game a year, if that, but there isn't crap they can do about it. The best part is, since I always pre-order every game coming out, I'm still guaranteed to get all of the exclusive content, whether or not I'm sure I want a certain game. It's like they're rewarding me for banking with them. I don't think GameStop is FDIC insured. Whole Foods gives a 5-cent discount if you bring your own bag. I pick up a single habanero pepper, free pepper. If someone went to all that trouble, I'd say go for it. If I'm planning on going out and fancy a certain restaurant, I go online maybe 2 weeks in advance, sign up to their mailing list, and give my birthday as being the day I'm planning on going. Most places give you some sort of freebie for your birthday. As a totally ethical aside to what this guy is doing, signing up for loyalty programs at any and all of your local restaurants will save you a ton of money when you go out. Every day I get email coupons for discounted food, BOGO deals, free appetizers or desserts, and of course the free birthday food. The week of my birthday is a tour of coupon redemptions. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. In DC, we have a computer program that lets you pay for your metro fare with pre-tax payroll deductions. In theory, you're supposed to have 2 metro cards and only use the pre-tax card for commuting to and from work. I've never met a soul that carried said 2 cards. As some of you have pointed out, and I've now realized, there is no clear federal rule that demands this. That said, I've poked around on a few different employers' websites to see what the Smart Benefits form looks like, and many of them have similar language to this example, not from my employer but a different one. I buy my college textbooks as ebooks on Amazon. I remove DRM and convert them to PDFs. I return ebooks to Amazon claiming something along the lines of, I decided to drop the class, free college textbooks, super easy with Caliber. In most cases where that might not work, I can typically find a torrent, though I'm much more wary of these sources. At this point, it occurs to me that it may be necessary to warn you all, but do this at your own risk. It's not unheard of for Amazon to slam down the ban hammer if they're suspicious of fraudulent activity, and evidently, when it comes down hard. I commute to work by train and I have a subscription ticket for it. But I don't pay what I really have to. I have to change trains on my way, but the ticket really only is for one train route. No one checks all the zones marked on my ticket, only if the date is right. I first drove part of the way by car, but then decided to try and leave the car at home to save me some money. I didn't want to get a pricier ticket to just try it out for 1 week to see if it works, and I get to work on time. I was hoping I don't get controlled, and if I would, I'd come up with a stupid excuse that my car is in the workshop. However, I was controlled, but no problems, no questions. I then decided to always use the train for the whole way to work, even if I had to get a pricier ticket. But I just never got that pricier ticket. Decided to see how long I'd get away with it. So far, no problem. This saves me about £30 per month. I do this for about a year now, and my ticket gets checked almost daily. Servers almost always underreport cash tips to some extent. My wife and I go to the same university. She attends and I work there. A plus to me working there is that she attends for free. A single parking permit is $850 per person for 2 semesters. We didn't want to have to pay $1,700 for 2 permits, so here is what I did. 1. Purchased my own permit for $850. Go to the permit office 2 weeks later, at the beginning of the semester the first 2 weeks are free parking, and I say that either, oh, I just sold my car and forgot I left the permit sticker on it, or I just had my windshield replaced and forgot to take off my permit sticker before they took the windshield. They charge me $40 for the replacement ticket and then mail it to me. And there we go. $890 for 2 permits is much better than $1,700 for 1. The only risk is that they scan the original permit's barcode because it was deactivated when I reported it as lost, but it's been 2 years of doing this trick and they haven't bothered to check it yet. I also used to heat the used stickers on my community college textbooks and sell the books back to the college and get a bit more money for them because they weren't considered used without the sticker. Leave it to students and university personnel to find ways to scrimp and save. Respect, my friends. Let the rich kids make their parents pay these kinds of bills. My girlfriend never put her license plates on her car. 2.5 years into her lease and she still uses the dealer placeholder. This lets her use toll roads and fast lanes without paying. She's never been pulled over, but I bet that's going to be an awkward conversation someday with the way she speeds. Just to clarify, she does pay her registration and receives her plates. She just permanently stores them in her glove box. They are gonna tow her vehicle when she gets pulled. Self-service checkout at the supermarket. No, I don't have any bags, Russell, Russell. You don't need to charge me 5 pence, Russell, Russell, Russell. I bought my PlayStation 4 a little over a year ago, used. Netflix is still signed into the previous owner's account. I wonder if they ever think, who's watching this crap? Let's say you have a relatively new car, no older than 5 years, that needs new tires. Find a rental car company that has your same car and rent it for the day. Go home and swap your wheels with the new car. When you return the car, they don't check tire tread levels, and unless you swapped with bald tires, the mechanics probably won't notice. Also, you're a scumbag if you do this. I was buying makeup last month and used the self-checkout. When I scanned my eyeliner, the machine kept telling me to place the item into the bag. Turns out the eyeliner was too light to register, so I threw a heavier, more expensive piece of makeup into the bag instead, without scanning it. The machine was satisfied then. Got as much student loan as possible from the government, €20,000, even though I don't need it, since the interest rate is so ridiculously low, 0.01% at the moment. Since the inflation is higher than the interest rate, I'm saving money that way. So, my job sent me to Japan several times. The train system is interesting there, so we found fun ways to exploit the system. We figured out how to abuse the heck out of station passes. When you get on any train, you can buy a ticket to your destination, or you can buy a station pass, which is about 50 cents. When you get off, you scan the station pass and it calculates how far you've ridden and charges you the difference. When we got off the plane in Tokyo, we bought a dozen station passes for Tokyo Station. Then, when we arrived at our destination, about $100 fare from Tokyo, we purchased a month-long ticket between adjacent stations. This ticket will let you on and off the train at either of those stations for a month. It's very cheap because fare between 2 close stations is only a few bucks. Travel to Tokyo, hop on a base station, use month pass, hop off in Tokyo, use station pass. Cost for $100 ride, 50 cents. Travel home. Hop on in Tokyo with station pass, hop off at base station with month pass. Cost for $100 ride? 50 cents. Also fun for sightseeing. You can ride the trains all over Japan for free as long as you don't leave the stations. Buy rotisserie chicken from a store, eat 3/4 of it, and return it claiming it was undercooked. I had a lady do this every week at a store I used to work at. I hated her with every ounce of my being. And that's why cooked chickens are $8.99 instead of $5.99. Fun fact, if you have a Costco membership, you can literally return anything. I worked in the bouquet department and we had a guy return flowers he bought the previous year's Valentine's Day, completely wilted and crumbly. He said they didn't last long and due to their return policy, we had to return it. I don't encourage taking advantage of this because Costco is a fantastic company to work for, but if you're in a bad situation, you can use it to your advantage. You really can return anything after any amount of time. My uncle was shopping for a new barbecue at Costco. He gets talking to the salesman, or someone about how his previous barbecue, which he bought at Costco, had worked for 10 years but was starting to go. They told him to return it and exchange it for a new one. He did that, and they accepted it, after 10 years of use. As a college student, stealing silverware from the dining hall has saved me a lot of money. Plot twist, your tuition is covering the cost of replacing silverware stolen by previous students.
So really, then you're losing money if you don't steal the forks.
Some of these stories have made the narrator aware for the first time of the completely normal fact of life of prices being inflated to adjust for the risk of theft. You jerks, I'm paying more because of you? If I can't find it on demand for free or on Netflix, I'm pirating it. The problem is that I wouldn't mind watching something on a TV channel most of the time, but I'm not going to pay $15 a month just so I can watch one TV show at the time the TV channel broadcasts it with ads. For half the price, you have Netflix. I can legally share Netflix, so it's only $4. It's full HD and 5.1 sound as well. What's the downside? Nothing. So I'm simply not going to pay that much. What's the point of that? Sometimes, when the bus driver isn't looking, I put in $2 and a nickel instead of $2 and a dime.
Oh, you disgust me.
Someone else is paying for my internet. A few months ago, I went online to see why I haven't been getting a bill, expecting to see a huge balance and a disconnect notice. Instead, I see my account is set up for autopay, with someone else's credit card. This has been going on for a little over a year, and I do not intend to raise any flags about it. In my city, you can either load a monthly subscription or just load a set amount of money into your bus pass. A monthly is $100. So when I was busing to work, I used to just load $50 and not tap my card on morning rides. I would only tap on my way home because the Trainspo cops were more likely to be patrolling in the afternoons. Now I drive to work, but the monthly parking pass is $200. Ain't nobody got time to pay for that, so I just park on the side of the street where there are 2-hour parking zones. But I usually don't move my car every 2 hours. It seems those rarely get checked because in the 2 months I've been doing this, I've only got 2 tickets, at $50 a ticket. It's still the cheapest option, but I don't even bother paying the tickets because I work in a different province than the one I live in. And as far as I can tell, there's no collaboration between the two vis-a-vis traffic tickets, so they don't follow up to make sure you've paid it. Not exactly unethical, but I dumpster dive. This year, I've picked up a microwave, a nearly new $200 DeLonghi espresso maker, a 52-inch Sanyo TV, technically a dumpster, and everything in it is private property. My landlord likes me a lot because I've been in the same house for 5+ years renting, so I get 2 parking spaces included for free. I only have 1 car, so I've been renting the other spot to different neighbors for $65 a month. Free parking and $780 a year for no work on my part. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.